The frozen key bit into Jack Morrison's palm like a shard of glass wrapped in ice, and he stood knee-deep in December snow staring at what looked less like shelter and more like a tomb jutting from the Colorado mountainside. The concrete entrance rose from white drifts, half buried, silent as death itself, possibly the worst decision he'd ever made, or the only one that could save them. Wind screamed through the mountain pass, cutting through his Carhartt jacket like the fabric was tissue paper. His fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago, the kind of numb that burns before it stops feeling anything at all. Each breath came out in white clouds that vanished into the gray afternoon light. The key, that single piece of industrial metal that represented everything he had left in this world, trembled in his frostbitten hand. Behind him, pressed against the rusted hood of their 23-year-old Honda Civic, 7-year-old Sophie watched with eyes that had seen too much for someone who still believed in Santa Claus. Those eyes had witnessed things no child should see. Too many parking lots where they pretended the backseat was camping. Too many mornings waking to frost coating the inside of windows, and her father's face trying to hide the fear that lived there now. Permanent as a scar cut deep. Jack turned back to the structure. This was it. This was what $750 of his last $800 had bought. An underground property, as is, no guarantees, no refunds, no second chances. The auction listing had been sparse to the point of suspicious. Former military communications facility, 40 acres, remote mountain location, hardened construction. The single photograph showed only this concrete face set into the hillside and a massive steel door. No interior shots. No details beyond GPS coordinates and a vague reference to infrastructure condition unknown. The kind of listing that screamed either opportunity or catastrophe, nothing in between. 3 months ago, Jack Morrison had been someone different. He'd been a master diagnostic technician at Davidson's Auto Repair in Denver, one of 2 mechanics who could troubleshoot the new computerized systems by sound alone. Former Marine Corps motor transport, 2 deployments to Helmand Province, honorably discharged with a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer because wearing it felt like asking for attention he didn't want. 4 years working at Davidson's. Solid reputation, steady paycheck, a life that wasn't glamorous but was theirs. Then Pete Davidson sold the shop. The new owner brought in his own crew, let Jack go on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 weeks severance and a handshake that felt like a slap. Jack had nodded once, said understood in that clipped Marine way, and walked out to the parking lot where his entire future had just been cut off at the knees. He tried everywhere after that, every dealership, every repair shop, every quick lube chain that would let him fill out an application. Winter was slow season. Everyone was cutting back, not hiring. The applications that asked about gaps in employment, about why he'd left his last job, about references. Those applications went into piles that never got callbacks. One shop manager had been honest enough to say it out loud. "You've got PTSD written all over you, Jack. You're a liability." The eviction notice came 6 weeks later, slipped under the apartment door, like a death sentence printed on cheap paper. Jack had sold everything that wasn't nailed down. The furniture, the TV, Sophie's bike. He'd sold his tools piece by piece to other mechanics, each wrench and socket a small amputation. The toolbox his father had carried in Vietnam, that was the only thing he kept. Everything else went for cash that vanished into back rent and food and gas. He'd packed what remained into garbage bags and the Civic's trunk, told Sophie they were going on an adventure, and drove to the Walmart parking lot on the edge of Denver. They'd been living there for 6 weeks now. 6 weeks of rotating between parking lots, moving before security noticed the same car in the same spot too many nights in a row. 6 weeks of truck stop bathrooms and fast food sinks and Sophie doing homework by the dome light, while Jack sat in the driver's seat pretending to read, but really just watching the rearview mirror for threats that never came but might. 6 weeks of Sophie asking when they were going home, and Jack lying through his teeth saying soon, "Sweetheart, Mommy has a plan," when the truth was he had no plan at all. Just $800, a car with a check engine light that had been on for 3 months, and a daughter who was starting to understand that other kids didn't sleep in back seats. It was December 19th when everything changed. 6 days before Christmas. The temperature had dropped into the teens, and even with the engine running and the heat blasting, Cold seeped through every gap in the Civic's weather, stripping like water finding cracks. Sophie had started coughing 3 days ago. Nothing serious yet, but Jack knew how these things could turn. A cold became bronchitis. Bronchitis became pneumonia. Pneumonia became a hospital visit they couldn't afford, and questions from social workers that Jack couldn't answer without risking losing Sophie entirely. That thought, the possibility of losing her, sat in his chest like a knife blade pressing against bone. It was 2:17 in the morning when he found the listing. Sophie asleep in the back seat under his jacket and both blankets they owned. Jack sat in the driver's seat with his phone at 6% battery, scrolling through rental listings he couldn't afford. A website glitch redirected him to a government surplus auction page. Most of it was junk. Abandoned lots in the middle of nowhere, burned out buildings condemned by counties. But one listing stopped his thumb mid-scroll. Underground hardened facility. Former Department of Defense communications site. Teller County, Colorado, 40 acres. Reinforced concrete construction. Built 1972, decommissioned 1996. Military-grade infrastructure. As is, where is. Starting bid $500. Auction ends in 6 hours. Jack clicked through the grainy photographs. A concrete entrance set into a hillside. A heavy steel door with industrial locking mechanisms. No interior shots. The description was almost criminally sparse. Property located in rural Teller County. Structure built to military specifications. Utilities condition unknown. Access road unpaved. Buyer responsible for all inspections and occupancy determinations. No warranty expressed or implied. It looked like something out of a Cold War fever dream, a doomsday prepper's fantasy, or a hole in the ground where hope went to die. Jack's rational mind, the part that had kept him alive in Helmand Province by calculating risks and probabilities, screamed that this was insane. He knew nothing about the property except that it existed, and apparently no one else wanted it. Could be flooded, could be structurally compromised, could be contaminated with God knew what from whatever they'd stored there during the Cold War. Could be absolutely worthless. But it was shelter, and shelter was something they didn't have. Jack watched the countdown timer tick down. 5 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, no one else was bidding. His finger hovered over the bid button. $500. That was more than half of everything he had left. At 2 hours remaining, he placed the bid. His hands shook as he hit confirm. The screen refreshed. He was the high bidder. Jack sat in the darkness of the Walmart parking lot, surrounded by other cars containing other people with nowhere else to go, and watched the minutes crawl past. He kept refreshing, expecting someone to outbid him, some logical person who had done their research and knew something he didn't. But no one came. At 17 minutes before the auction closed, Jack increased his bid to $750. It felt like throwing his life savings off a cliff, but at least it was a choice. At least it was something other than waiting for the cold to make Sophie sicker or for some social worker to decide he wasn't fit to care for his own daughter. When the auction closed at 6:43 in the morning, Jack Morrison owned an underground bunker in the mountains of Colorado. Sophie woke up an hour later, coughing into her sleeve. Her forehead felt warm when he pressed his palm against it. Not quite fever hot, but heading that direction. "Sweetheart, we're going somewhere today. Going to our new home." The drive took 4 hours, Interstate 70 west toward the mountains, then off onto Highway 24, then onto county roads that got narrower and less maintained with every turn. The Civic struggled on the inclines, engine whining, transmission slipping in ways that made Jack's mechanic instincts scream warnings. They passed through a town called Clearwater, population 847, according to a sign that looked older than Jack. He stopped at the only gas station, a combination convenience store, and auto repair that looked like it had been there since the 50s. "Ruby's Gas and Grocery," the hand-painted sign read. Jack bought crackers, peanut butter, bottled water, work gloves, and duct tape with money he couldn't afford to spend. The woman at the counter was weathered and gray-haired, maybe 65, with eyes that had seen their share of desperate people buying supplies with their last dollars. "You folks passing through?" "Moving here," Jack said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The woman looked at Sophie, then back at Jack. "Into town or out in the hills?" "Out, bought some property." The woman's eyebrows rose. "You're the one who bought the old Barrett place, the underground facility." Jack paused. "Barrett?" "William Barrett. Built that bunker back in the 70s. Eccentric billionaire type, paranoid as they come about economic collapse and nuclear war and God knows what else. Died about 5 years back. Place has been sitting empty ever since. You know what you're getting into out there? I'll figure it out. The woman studied him for a long moment. Jack recognized the look. She was reading him the way Jack used to read terrain in Afghanistan, looking for signs of competence or desperation or danger. Military, she asked finally. Marines. Her expression softened slightly. My boy was Army, Iraq, 2007. A moment of understanding passed between them, the kind that didn't require words, the knowledge that some experiences left marks that never fully healed. Semper Fi, soldier. She slid a business card across the counter. That's my nephew. Good lawyer if you need one. Tom Russo. Fair rates won't rip you off like those Denver types. Jack pocketed the card, appreciated. The property management office was a single-wide trailer at the edge of town. A man named Henry Walsh, maybe 60, with a belly that pressed against his flannel shirt and eyes that had seen too many bad land deals, handed Jack a manila envelope containing a deed, a survey map, and 2 keys on a ring. You're the one who bought the Barrett facility. That's me. Henry looked at Sophie, then back at Jack. You know what you're getting into out there, son? Planning to find out. Property's been sitting empty since 2018 when Barrett died. Estate sold it off cheap after no private buyers emerged. It's about 19 miles up Forest Service Road 81. 4-wheel drive recommended. He nodded toward the Civic, visible through the trailer's window. But you might make it in that if you're careful and lucky. What can you tell me about the facility itself? Henry shrugged. Never been inside. Exterior door was locked when we listed it. Whatever's in there is yours now, good or bad. Barrett built it during the Cold War when he was doing defense contract work. Supposedly spent millions, but I've got no idea what condition it's in after 5 years of sitting empty. He paused, studying Jack's face. Listen, Mr. Morrison, I don't know your story and it's not my business, but it's supposed to snow heavy tonight. If you're planning on staying out there, make sure you've got supplies. Cell service is spotty at best. Nearest neighbor is probably 12 miles in any direction. You break down or get stuck. Could be days before anyone finds you. We'll manage, Jack said, taking the envelope. The road to the property wasn't really a road. It was 2 ruts cut through pine forest, overgrown with weeds and saplings, barely wide enough for the Civic. Branches scraped against the doors with sounds like fingernails on metal. The car bottomed out on rocks and frozen mud, the undercarriage scraping in ways that made Jack wince. Each impact was another small death of the vehicle that was their last lifeline to civilization. Sophie sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3, watching the forest close in around them like walls of a tunnel leading somewhere dark. Dad, is it going to be scary? Jack glanced at her. No, sweetheart. It's going to be an adventure. Like camping. Like a hobbit house? Sophie managed a small smile. Maybe. We'll see. The GPS on Jack's phone died 2 miles in. Signal lost. He followed the hand-drawn survey map from the envelope, navigating by landmarks. A split pine tree, a creek crossing where Jack had to gun the engine and hope momentum carried them through water that sprayed over the hood. A boulder shaped like a crouching bear. After 40 minutes of crawling forward at 5 miles per hour, praying the transmission wouldn't give out, the trees opened into a clearing. Jack stopped the car. His hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles went white. There it was. The bunker entrance rose from the hillside like a concrete monument to Cold War paranoia. The structure was maybe 20 feet wide, 12 feet tall, with a single massive steel door set into the center. Snow had drifted against the base in frozen waves. Ice hung from the edges where water had seeped and frozen over years, creating jagged formations that caught the weak winter sunlight and threw it back in fractured rainbows. The whole thing looked utilitarian and brutal, Soviet in its complete lack of aesthetic consideration, built to withstand the end of the world, or at least to hide from it. Rust streaked the steel door in orange and brown patterns, decades of oxidation creating abstract art. The door itself was 7 feet tall, 4 feet wide, with hinges the size of Jack's forearm. Industrial, overbuilt, serious. Wow, Sophie breathed. It really does look like a fort. Jack studied it with a tactical eye. The concrete face appeared solid. No obvious cracks or structural damage visible from this distance. Snowdrifts suggested water drainage was working properly, meaning internal seals were likely intact. The door showed rust, but not the kind of deep corrosion that indicated structural failure. Professional construction, military grade. "Let's see what we've got," Jack said, turning off the engine. The silence that followed was total. No traffic, no voices, no city hum, just wind through pine trees and the tick of the cooling engine and the sound of their own breathing suddenly loud in the stillness. Jack and Sophie climbed out into snow that came up past Sophie's knees. "Stay close to me," Jack said. They broke trail toward the entrance, Sophie following in Jack's footsteps. The clearing was maybe half an acre, surrounded by dense forest. The survey map showed the 40 acres extended in every direction from this point, but Jack couldn't tell where their property ended and national forest began. It all looked the same, white and cold and indifferent to human struggles. The steel door loomed larger as they approached. Jack could see details now. A keyhole at chest height, surrounded by a locking mechanism that looked like something designed to seal out nuclear fallout. Multiple bolts, precision German engineering if he had to guess. The kind of hardware that cost more than most people's cars. He pulled out the larger of the two keys. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or nerves he couldn't tell anymore. The key slid into the lock but didn't turn. Jack tried again, applying steady pressure. Nothing. He wiggled it, pulled it out, examined the keyhole for ice or debris, tried again. On the fourth attempt, something clicked deep inside the mechanism, a sound like tumblers falling into place, like a safe opening, like possibility. Jack turned the key clockwise and felt resistance give way. "You did it, Daddy," Sophie said. Jack grabbed the handle and pulled. The door was heavy, easily 200 pounds of solid steel, but it swung open on hinges that groaned with the sound of metal that hadn't moved in years. The groan echoed off the concrete and out into the clearing, a sound like waking something that had been sleeping. Cold air rushed out from the darkness beyond, carrying smells of concrete and metal and something else. Something stale but not rotten, like an attic sealed for decades. Like time itself made into atmosphere. Jack clicked on his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a space beyond the door. Not a room exactly, but a chamber. Concrete walls, concrete floor, concrete ceiling. And at the far end, maybe 20 feet away, another door. Smaller, more normal-sized, with the second keyhole waiting. "Stay close," Jack said, taking Sophie's hand. They stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, their breath fogging in the flashlight beam. The chamber was empty except for debris scattered across the floor. Broken furniture, cable spools, a torn tarp covering something Jack couldn't identify in the shadows. But the walls were solid, no water pooling on the floor, no obvious structural damage. Someone had built this to last. Jack approached the inner door and inserted the smaller key. It turned smoothly, the lock mechanism well-maintained despite years of disuse. The door opened into complete darkness that seemed to swallow the flashlight beam. Jack swept the light left and right, up and down, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. A hallway. Concrete walls lined with conduit and pipes running in neat parallel lines. Doors branching off to either side every 10 feet. And at the end of the corridor, maybe 40 feet away, a stairwell, leading down. "It's huge," Sophie whispered, her voice echoing in the space. Jack's heart was pounding now. This wasn't just a bunker. This wasn't some simple fallout shelter dug into a hillside. This was a facility, the kind of place built with serious money and serious purpose, the kind of place that had infrastructure and systems and levels. On the wall beside the stairwell, partially obscured by a shadow, Jack could make out stenciled lettering. He moved closer, raised the flashlight. The words came into focus. "Winter Vault Site 7, Barrett Industries, Private Research, Authorized Personnel Only, Security Clearance Top Secret." Jack stood very still, reading and rereading those words. His mind raced through implications. This wasn't government surplus. This was private. A billionaire's personal project built to specifications that exceeded military standards. Hidden in a mountain. Forgotten by estate lawyers. Sold for $750 to a desperate man with a sick daughter and nowhere else to go. "Daddy," Sophie said quietly, "what's top secret mean?" Jack looked down at his daughter, then back into the darkness of the stairwell that descended into unknown depths. "It means, Princess, we just walked into someone's very expensive secret." The flashlight beam trembled slightly in Jack's hand. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of realization. Whatever lay below, whatever William Barrett had built and hidden and maintained for decades, it was theirs now, for better or worse, for salvation or ruin. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began falling heavier, thick flakes that would cover their tire tracks in the Civic, in any evidence that they'd come here at all. Inside, in the concrete stillness of the facility, Jack Morrison stood at the threshold of the unknown, with his daughter's hand in his, and made a decision. They would explore, they would understand, they would survive. Because Marines don't quit, they adapt, they improvise, they overcome. And whatever secrets Wintervault held, they would face them together. Jack squeezed Sophie's hand once, took a breath that tasted like concrete dust and possibility, and stepped forward into the darkness. The first night in Wintervault, Jack Morrison didn't sleep. He lay on a plastic-wrapped mattress in one of the bunk rooms on level 1. Sophie curled beside him under every jacket and blanket they owned, and listened to silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. Not the silence he'd grown used to in parking slots, broken by passing cars and distant sirens, and the occasional knock of security guards checking if anyone was sleeping where they shouldn't be. This was different. This was total, absolute. The kind of quiet that existed hundreds of feet underground, where sound had nothing to bounce off except concrete and steel, and the weight of a mountain pressing down from above. Jack's eyes adjusted to darkness that was darker than any night sky. No streetlights, no moon, no ambient glow from a city that never truly slept. Just black so thick it had texture, had weight, had presence. He could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Sophie's breathing, the slight whistle in her nose from the cold she was developing, could hear water dripping somewhere distant, the sound carrying through ventilation shafts like Morse code from another world. His mind wouldn't stop cataloging, assessing, planning. It was the same tactical thinking that had kept him alive in Helmand Province, the same constant evaluation of threats and resources and options. Except here the enemy wasn't insurgents with AK-47s. Here the enemy was cold, and darkness, and the very real possibility that this concrete tomb they'd bought for $750 would become exactly that, a tomb. When gray light finally crept through the open entrance 3 levels above, filtered down through stairwells and corridors until it was barely a suggestion of dawn, Jack rose at 05:30 exactly. His body still kept military time, even 4 years after discharge. Some habits ran too deep to break, and maybe that was a good thing. Habits kept you sharp. Habits kept you ready. He did push-ups on the cold concrete floor. 50 of them, arms burning, breath coming hard in the frigid air. Then sit-ups, then stretches that pulled at scar tissue in his left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through muscle during a convoy ambush outside Marja. The pain was familiar, almost welcome. Pain meant alive. Pain meant functional. Pain was just another kind of information. Sophie slept through his morning routine, her small body barely making a lump under the pile of blankets. Jack watched her for a long moment, saw how her face was flushed even in sleep, how she'd kicked off one blanket because fever made her too warm despite the cold room. That cough was getting worse. He could hear it in how she breathed, a slight rattle in her chest that made his own chest tight with worry that had nowhere to go. Time to make this place livable. Jack spent the first 2 hours of daylight conducting a systematic reconnaissance of level 1. Not random exploration, but methodical mapping, the way Marines cleared buildings in Fallujah. He moved from room to room with purpose, noting everything, missing nothing. The barracks section held 6 bunk rooms identical to the one they'd slept in. Each room had 4 beds built into the walls, submarine style, with storage lockers underneath, military efficiency, maximum occupancy in minimum space. The mattresses were all wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age but kept the foam inside relatively clean. Jack found bedding stored in foot lockers, vacuum sealed and still usable. Whoever had built this place had planned for long-term occupation. The galley kitchen was commercial grade, industrial sinks deep enough to wash full-size sheet pans, a walk-in freezer with the door propped open, empty and smelling only of stale air instead of the rot Jack had half expected. Commercial gas range with 8 burners, overhead pot racks still holding cookware, dry storage shelves lining one wall, and on those shelves, canned goods. Jack examined them with a mechanic's attention to detail. Green beans dated 2017, Tomato sauce from 2016. Soup, vegetables, fruit, all commercially canned with expiration dates that had come and gone, but seals that looked intact. In a survival situation, canned food lasted years past its printed date if the can wasn't compromised. Jack had eaten MREs in Afghanistan that were older than some of the privates carrying them. The head, military term for bathroom, contained 3 toilets, 3 sinks, 3 shower stalls, all dry, all showing the mineral deposits of hard water that had sat in pipes before evaporating. Jack turned a tap handle. Nothing. Expected. The water system would need to be pressurized, which meant finding pumps and bringing them online. The common room had tables and chairs and a corkboard on one wall still pinned with notices and a calendar frozen on October 2018. Someone had written generator service due on the 15th. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of this facility sitting dark and silent while the world above forgot it existed. Jack found office spaces, desks and filing cabinets, and a computer so old it probably ran Windows XP. He powered nothing on yet. First rule of working with unknown systems: you don't energize anything until you understand the whole picture. You don't flip switches and hope. You trace circuits. You verify integrity. You work methodically, or you create bigger problems than you started with. The real discovery was at the end of the main corridor, a door marked mechanical in faded stencil. Jack opened it to reveal a stairwell leading down to level 2, and suddenly the scope of Wintervault expanded in his mind like a map unfolding. This wasn't a bunker. This was a complex. Level 2 smelled different, colder. The air had a metallic quality that came from being around serious machinery. Jack's flashlight beam swept across a corridor identical in layout to level 1, but with different purposes behind each door. Storage rooms holding boxes stacked to the ceiling. A medical bay with examination tables and cabinets that probably held supplies. And at the far end, a door marked electrical. Jack's heart rate picked up slightly. This was it. This was where the facility's nervous system lived. The electrical room was smaller than he expected, but densely packed with equipment. The main breaker panel covered an entire wall, 20 circuits each labeled in neat handwriting. Lighting level 1, HVAC primary, water pumps, kitchen equipment, communications. Each circuit a system waiting to wake up. Jack didn't touch anything yet. Instead, he opened the panel and inspected with the flashlight held between his teeth, both hands free to examine connections. The work was professional, color-coded wiring, proper strain relief, breakers that were commercial grade, not residential junk. Someone had spent serious money on the electrical infrastructure. He traced conduit runs with his eyes, following the metallic paths through the ceiling and down through the floor. Everything led to one place, the generator room. Jack found it 2 doors down, room 207. The door was heavier than others, insulated, and when he pulled it open, the smell hit him immediately. Diesel fuel and machine oil, and the particular scent of serious engineering. His flashlight beam traveled across the space and stopped on what sat in the center like a sleeping god. A Caterpillar 3512 diesel generator, 1,000 kilowatts, 12-cylinder turbocharged engine the size of a compact car. The kind of generator that powered hospitals during blackouts or kept data centers running when the grid failed. Professional, industrial, serious as a heart attack. Jack walked around it slowly, his mechanic's eye taking in every detail. The engine block was painted cat yellow, the color dulled by years and dust, but the metal underneath solid. The alternator was Marathon Electric, brushless design, probably good for 100,000 hours of runtime. Fuel lines ran from the base to a day tank, and from the day tank to what must be a much larger storage tank buried somewhere in the mountain. He popped the oil dipstick. The oil that clung to it was golden, not the black sludge of neglect. Someone had maintained this machine. He checked the coolant reservoir, empty, which made sense. You don't leave coolant in a system that might freeze. He examined belts and hoses. Aged, showing some cracking, but not the kind of degradation that meant immediate failure. The fuel gauge on the day tank read 3/4 full. Jack did quick math in his head. If the main storage tank was proportionally full, they had hundreds of gallons of diesel, maybe 1,000, enough to run this beast for weeks if they needed to. But there was a problem. Several problems, actually. The batteries were dead. 4 massive 8D batteries in series, the kind that weighed 100 pounds each. and they'd been sitting for 6 years with no charge. Dead as stones, the coolant system was empty, which meant running the engine would destroy it in minutes from overheating. And the fuel had been sitting for years, possibly degraded, possibly contaminated with water or algae growth. Jack stood in the generator room, hands on his hips, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Purpose. This was a problem he could solve. This wasn't bureaucracy or bad luck or economic systems he couldn't control. This was mechanical. This was knowable. This was fixable. He walked back to the Civic and stripped it methodically, pulled the battery from under the hood, knowing it meant the car wouldn't start again without it, but making the calculation that power here was worth more than mobility that led nowhere. Retrieved his father's toolbox from the trunk, that battered red Craftsman box that had been to Vietnam and back and now to a bunker in Colorado. Grabbed the half-empty jug of antifreeze he always kept in the back. The jumper cables, work gloves, everything that might be useful. Sophie was awake when he came back down, sitting on the edge of the bunk, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Morning, princess. How are you feeling?" "Okay." She coughed, a wet sound that made Jack's jaw tighten. "Where did you go?" "Checking our new house. Want to help me with a project?" They worked together, Jack explaining each step the way his father had explained things to him when he was young. Teaching by doing, passing down knowledge like an inheritance more valuable than money. First, they filled the generator's coolant system. Jack lifted Sophie up so she could pour antifreeze into the reservoir while he monitored the level. The system took 3 gallons, which left them with maybe a gallon in reserve. Not much margin for error. Next, the battery problem. Jack couldn't jump the whole bank with the Civic's single battery, but he could jump enough to spin the starter. He connected the cables carefully, positive to positive, negative to ground, double-checking because reversing polarity would fry electronics and leave them worse off than they started. The fuel system needed bleeding. Air trapped in the lines would prevent the engine from firing. Jack found the fuel petcocks, small valves that let you drain air from high points in the system, and opened them one by one. Diesel dribbled out, puddling on the concrete floor, and Jack ignored the waste because getting the system primed mattered more than saving a few ounces. "Sophie, I need you to stand back now. By the door. If anything goes wrong, you run upstairs. Understand?" What could go wrong? Lots of things, but it probably won't. Probably? Probably. Jack positioned himself at the control panel. The starter button was red, large, obvious. Around it were gauges for oil pressure, coolant temperature, voltage, frequency, all of them sitting at 0, waiting. He took a breath, thought about all the ways this could fail. Dead injectors, seized pistons, contaminated fuel, electrical faults. 1,000 things that could make this dormant machine stay dormant forever. Then he thought about Sophie coughing in the cold, about the temperature dropping every night, about the very real possibility that this was their only chance. Jack pressed the starter button. The starter motor engaged with a grinding whir that echoed off concrete walls. The engine turned over once. Compression fought back against the starter. Twice. Cylinders that hadn't moved in 6 years grudgingly rotating. 3 times. Then combustion. A single cylinder fired with a sound like a cannon shot. The engine shook. A second cylinder caught, then a third. Black smoke belched from the exhaust stack that vented somewhere up through the mountain. The engine coughed, sputtered, almost died. Jack held his breath. Then all 12 cylinders synchronized into a roar that made the floor vibrate, made the walls hum, made Sophie put her hands over her ears. The generator spun up, RPMs climbing from cranking speed to idle to operating speed. 800, 1200, 1800. The speed governor took over and held it there, steady as a heartbeat. Jack watched the gauges come alive. Oil pressure climbing, 20 psi, 40, 60. Good. Coolant temperature starting to rise slowly. Voltage building as the alternator spun faster. 120, 240, 480 volts of 3-phase power pouring into bus bars that fed the entire facility. Sophie was staring at the machine with wide eyes, hands still over her ears against the noise. Jack grinned through the diesel fumes. "That baby is electricity. You fixed it?" It wasn't really broken, just sleeping. Jack left the generator running at idle, afraid to shut it down in case it wouldn't restart, and returned to the electrical room. Time to bring this place back to life. He approached the breaker panel like a conductor approaching an orchestra. Each circuit was an instrument, each system a section. and he was about to see if they could still play together after 6 years of silence. First breaker, lighting level 1. Jack flipped it to the on position. 3 levels above, fluorescent tubes flickered, stuttered. Some stayed dark, their ballast burned out or bulbs dead. But most came on, flooding corridors with light that seemed harsh after days of flashlight beams and darkness. Suddenly the facility was visible. All of it. The scope and the scale and the professional construction quality that money and paranoia had built. Second breaker. Lighting level 2. More lights answering the call. The mechanical spaces and storage rooms emerging from shadow into fluorescent reality. Third breaker. HVAC primary. This one Jack hesitated on. Moving air meant moving dust, and 6 years of accumulated dust could clog filters and damage blowers. But they needed ventilation, needed fresh air circulating. He flipped the breaker. Deep in the facility's chest, air handlers woke up. Heavy equipment that pulled air through filters and pushed it through ductwork that reached every room. The sound was a low whoosh that built into a steady breathing rhythm. Dust billowed from vents, making Sophie cough, making the air hazy for a few minutes, until the system cleared its throat. But then came air movement. Fresh air from outside being pulled through intake vents Jack hadn't even known existed. Stale air being exhausted. The temperature started to shift. Not warm yet, but warmer than the tomb cold they'd been living in. Fourth breaker. Water pumps. This one made Jack nervous. Water systems failed in dramatic ways. Burst pipes, flooded rooms, pumps that seized and burned out. But they needed water almost as much as they needed power. He flipped the breaker. Somewhere deep below level 2, deeper than they'd explored yet, pumps activated. Jack heard them through the concrete, a distant thumping rhythm like a heartbeat starting. The pumps ran for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, pressure building in pipes that hadn't held water in years. Then the sound changed, steadied. The pumps throttled back to maintenance speed. Jack ran to the level 1 bathroom, Sophie following. He turned the tap handle. The pipe rattled, banged. Air pressure blowing through, then a sputter of brown water, rust and sediment that had settled in the pipes. Jack let it run. The water cleared from brown to rust, colored to slightly cloudy to clear, cold and clean, and flowing strong. He cupped his hands, tasted it. Mineral heavy, hard water from deep aquifer, but clean, potable. Life. Sophie, you can take a shower if you want. Really? A real shower. A real hot shower. Give the water heater 20 minutes to warm up. Sophie disappeared into the bathroom and Jack heard water running, heard her testing the temperature, heard the squeal of joy when hot water poured from the shower head, then singing. His daughter's voice echoing off tile, singing some song from school, and Jack had to turn away and press his forehead against the cold concrete wall because the relief was too much to show on his face. For the first time in 6 weeks, his daughter was warm, clean, safe. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Over the next 3 days, Jack worked 16-hour shifts, bringing Wintervault fully online while Sophie explored the spaces he'd already cleared as safe. He approached each system with methodical precision, the way bomb techs approached unexploded ordnance. Slow, careful, respecting the fact that mechanical systems could kill you if you were careless or rushed. He traced the water system from source to tap, found the well pumps on level 3, massive Grundfos units that pulled water from an aquifer 500 feet down, found the pressure tanks, the filtration system, the UV sterilization units that killed bacteria. Everything professional grade, everything still functional. Barrett had built this place to last generations. The heating system was radiant floor heat, hot water running through tubes embedded in the concrete. Jack bled air from the loops, balanced the zones, brought the system online gradually. Within 12 hours, the floors went from cold to cool to barely warm to comfortable. The ambient temperature rose from the low 40s to 60 degrees. Livable, sustainable. He found food stores beyond what was in the kitchen, entire rooms on level 2 dedicated to long-term storage, commercial shelving units holding cases of canned goods, dried pasta, rice in vacuum-sealed bags, flour in airtight containers. Enough food for a dozen people for a year. Maybe longer if rationed. More wealth than money could buy when you were hungry. But the real discoveries came from exploring the office spaces and reading the paper trail that William Barrett had left behind. Jack wasn't trying to snoop. He was trying to understand. trying to learn who had built this place and why and what had happened to it. In the facility director's office, a room with a desk and filing cabinets and a window that looked out at concrete wall, Jack found maintenance logs going back 20 years. Spiral notebooks filled with neat handwriting, each entry dated and signed with initials. WB. William Barrett himself, not contractors, not hired help, but the billionaire personally coming to this remote facility once a month or more to check systems, run tests, record readings. The entries read like love letters to machinery. Generator oil changed, filter replaced, coolant flushed and refilled. HVAC filters replaced, ductwork inspected, dampers lubricated. Water filtration membranes changed on schedule. Every system maintained with obsessive care, with attention to detail that spoke to someone who understood that infrastructure failed when neglected. The last entry was dated July 14th, 2018. Final systems check. All parameters nominal. Fuel reserves adequate. This facility could run indefinitely with minimal intervention. God willing, someone will find this worthy of the care I've given it. WB. July 14th, 2018. 6.5 years ago. And then nothing. No more entries. The logs just stopped, mid-life, mid-routine, as if the person writing them had simply vanished. Jack found the explanation in another file cabinet. Estate documents, death certificate. William James Barrett, age 71, died August 9th, 2018, of pancreatic cancer at his home in Colorado Springs. No surviving spouse, no children, no close relatives. Estate liquidated per instructions in will. Assets distributed to various charities and research foundations. But Wintervault wasn't mentioned in the will, wasn't listed in the estate inventory, wasn't distributed or donated or even acknowledged. The facility had been deliberately excluded, hidden in layers of shell corporations and land trusts that the estate lawyers had either missed or not bothered to unravel. When the trust dissolved for unpaid fees, the property had reverted to county ownership and been auctioned as surplus land. Sold to Jack Morrison for $750. It was Sophie who found the journal. She was exploring the break room on level 1, a space with a kitchenette and tables and a bookshelf holding technical manuals and paperback novels, when she pulled out a leather-bound book wedged between a coffee-stained HVAC manual and a stack of magazines from the 90s. "Dad, look, someone's diary." The cover was soft leather, cracked with age, embossed with initials. WB, private journal, it said in gold letters almost worn away. Jack hesitated. Reading a dead man's private thoughts felt like violation, but Barrett was gone. The facility was theirs, and understanding the man who'd built this place might help Jack understand what he'd actually bought. He opened to a random page dated March 3rd, 2012. Spent $47 million over 16 years maintaining Wintervault. Rational mind says I'm insane, but I've seen the fragility of systems. I was inside NORAD during the Cuban Missile Crisis, civilian tech advisor, only 25 years old, and I watched men plan the end of the world like it was a logistics problem. I saw how close we came to turning continents into ash over politics and pride. This isn't paranoia, this is pattern recognition. Civilization is a thin shell over chaos. Economics, technology, social order, all of it held together by trust and electricity and the assumption that tomorrow will look like today. But trust breaks, electricity fails, assumptions shatter. Everything stored in Wintervault represents value that survives collapse. Not paper promises, not digital abstractions, real assets, physical wealth, gold that's been valuable for 5,000 years, art that transcends politics, bearer instruments that function without banks, stock certificates that prove ownership when computers are dark. If civilization holds, someone inherits treasure. If civilization fails, I have means to rebuild. Either way, Wintervault serves its purpose. Jack read page after page, watching a brilliant man's mind work through problems both practical and philosophical. Barrett wrote about engineering challenges, about upgrading systems, about the satisfaction of building something that would outlast him. But he also wrote about loneliness, about regret, about the cost of living in fear. The entries near the end changed in tone, became more reflective, more honest. June 2nd, 2018. Diagnosis came back. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable. Maybe 3 months if I'm lucky, maybe less. I've lived 71 years, built a fortune from military contracts and tech patents, protected that fortune like a dragon guarding gold. And for what? No wife, no children, no close friends, just lawyers and accountants and contractors who smile because I pay them to smile. I've spent decades preparing for collapse, and I've collapsed anyway, just from the inside instead of the outside. What a waste. The last entry was dated July 10th, 2018. 4 days before that final maintenance log. 4 days before what must have been Barrett's last visit to Wintervault when he was already dying. I'm leaving Wintervault out of my will. Let the estate lawyers miss it. Let it be sold as worthless land. Let someone desperate find it by accident or providence or sheer stubborn survival instinct. Whoever is desperate enough to buy an underground facility sight unseen, whoever is curious enough to explore it, whoever is brave enough to stay, they deserve what's here. Not my worthless relatives who will circle like vultures. Not the government that will tie it up in bureaucracy. Someone who needs it, someone who'll use it, someone who understands that wealth means nothing if you're too afraid to live. The code is simple. The code is what I forgot to value until too late. The code is love. Below that, written in the margin in numbers that look like an afterthought, 6 digits, 071498. Jack stared at those numbers. They looked like a date, July 14th, 1998. He pulled out his phone, searched for any significance. William Barrett's mother, Margaret Ann Barrett, died July 14th, 1998, after a long battle with Alzheimer's disease. She was 79. The code was the date his mother died. The most important person in his life, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father left, the person he'd failed to spend enough time with while building his fortune. The code was grief. The code was regret. The code was love, remembered too late. And that code opened something. Jack was sure of it. He'd seen the door on level 3 during his systematic exploration, a door that was different from all the others. Steel reinforced with blast shielding visible in the frame, a digital keypad mounted beside it, screen glowing a dull red in the otherwise unpowered corridor. The screen had displayed a single word: locked. Jack had photographed it, noted its location, and moved on because he'd had more pressing concerns. Power and water and heat mattered more than locked doors. But now, reading Barrett's journal, seeing that code, understanding what it meant, Jack felt something shift in his understanding of Wintervault. This wasn't just a survival bunker. This was something else, something more. On the 6th day, December 25th, Christmas morning, Jack woke to Sophie coughing. The sound was wetter than before, deeper in her chest, and when he pressed his palm to her forehead, she was warmer than she should be. Not quite fever territory, but close. Too close. He'd found cold medicine in the medical bay, children's formulas still sealed in packaging, and he gave her the proper dose with water. Made her oatmeal from packets they'd found in storage, added sugar to make it more appealing. Watched her eat slowly without appetite, her usually bright eyes a little glazed. They opened presents after breakfast. Jack had managed to find a few items during his explorations. A deck of cards, still wrapped in cellophane. A small stuffed bear from the medical bay, probably meant for scared children during emergencies. Sophie gave him a drawing she'd made on paper from the office supplies. A picture of the two of them standing in front of Wintervault with the word home written above it in careful letters. Jack taped it to the wall above his bunk. First decoration in their new home. After Sophie fell asleep for a mid-morning nap, exhausted by her cold, Jack stood alone in the common room and made a decision. Time to see what was behind that locked door. Time to understand what William Barrett had really built here. Time to know if the code that represented love and loss would unlock whatever secret the billionaire had hidden in the mountain. He descended to level 3, footsteps echoing in the stairwell, and walked the corridor to the reinforced door at the end. The keypad glowed its steady red, patient as stone, waiting for someone to understand. Jack entered the code slowly. 071498. The screen flickered. Red became green. A mechanical symphony began inside the door. Bolts retracting with precision, pressure equalizing with a hiss that sounded like a sigh, like something held too long releasing. The word on the screen changed. Locked became open. Jack grabbed the handle. The door swung inward on hinges so well balanced that its obvious weight moved like it was weightless. Motion sensors detected presence and lights began activating automatically. fluorescent tubes flickering to life in sequence, revealing what lay beyond. Jack Morrison stepped through the doorway and stopped breathing. It wasn't a room, it was a cathedral carved from living rock, 30 feet high at its apex, stretching back into the mountain maybe 100 feet, and it was full. Not with supplies or equipment or survival gear. It was full of wealth, organized wealth, cataloged wealth, preserved wealth, arranged with obsessive care that spoke to years of methodical accumulation. Glass display cases lined both walls, each one climate-controlled with digital displays showing temperature and humidity kept in perfect preservation ranges. Safety deposit boxes covered the back wall from floor to ceiling, 400-plus boxes arranged in numerical sequence, each one a small vault within the larger vault. And in the center, a desk with a leather-bound ledger lying open as if William Barrett had just stepped away and would return any moment to continue his work. Jack walked forward slowly, his boots loud on concrete, each step taking him deeper into a secret that had waited 6 years to be discovered, deeper into wealth that existed outside normal systems, deeper into the legacy of a brilliant, lonely, terrified man who'd hidden his fortune in a mountain and then died hoping someone worthy would find it. The first display case held coins. Not pocket change, but numismatic specimens in velvet-lined trays with inventory cards beneath each one. Gold eagles that caught the light and threw it back amplified. Morgan silver dollars arranged by date and mint mark. Foreign coins with scripts Jack couldn't read. Each tray had a small card in neat handwriting. 1893 S. Morgan dollar, MS-65 grade, estimated value $45,000. One coin, $45,000. And there were hundreds of coins visible in just this one case. Jack moved to the next case. Historical currency, large format notes from the 1800s with engravings so detailed they look like art prints. Confederate money from the Civil War. German Reichsmarks from the Weimar hyperinflation. Soviet rubles printed before the collapse. Each bill a frozen moment from an empire that had crumbled. The inventory card read, Historical Currency Collection. 347 pieces. Total estimated value $8.2 million. $8.2 million in old paper. The artwork stopped him completely. Jack Morrison didn't know art from advertising, but he knew quality when he saw it. And these pieces radiated quality like heat. An impressionist harbor scene with boats at sunset, colors so luminous they seemed to generate their own light. A bronze sculpture of a dancer, every muscle and tendon captured in frozen grace. A watercolor of coastal cliffs that Jack recognized as Maine, though he'd never been there. Each piece had a card, authentication certificates, provenance documentation, values that made his head spin, 4.7 million, 2.1 million, 3.8 million. And those were just 3 paintings out of dozens. Jack reached the safety deposit boxes and found keys hanging on hooks beside the first box, labeled and color-coded. He removed box 1986001, the first box, and carried it to the central desk. Inside, nestled in foam, 20 gold Krugerrands in protective capsules. The documentation showed purchase price from June 1986, $368 per ounce. Current gold price, which Jack looked up on his phone with 1 bar of signal, was around $1,900 per ounce. $38,000 in 1 box, and there were 412 boxes. Jack opened more boxes at random, his hands shaking now, his breath coming fast. Bearer bonds from Fortune 500 companies. Stock certificates for Microsoft and Apple and Amazon, purchased years ago when prices were fraction of current values. USB drives in anti-static bags labeled with Bitcoin wallet information. Every box was a fortune. Every box represented years of patient accumulation. Every box was part of a systematic plan to preserve wealth across every asset class that might survive economic collapse. The master ledger on the desk confirmed what Jack's racing mind was trying to process. Thick, leather-bound pages covered in Barrett's precise handwriting, documenting every purchase, every addition, every assessment. The final page, dated March 28, 2018, showed a summary that made the world tilt sideways. Total asset valuation. Gold and precious metals, $47.2 million. Rare currency, $12.4 million. Fine art, $33.8 million. Bearer bonds, $41.6 million. Stock certificates, $118.3 million. Cryptocurrency holdings, 56.7 million. Grand total, $310 million. $310 million hidden in a mountain, stored in a facility, maintained for decades, and now legally owned by Jack Morrison, who'd paid $750 for what he thought was an abandoned bunker where his sick daughter could be warm. Jack sat down on the floor because his legs wouldn't hold him anymore. He sat with his back against the desk, and he tried to understand what this meant, what it changed, what it required. An envelope lay on his desk beside the ledger. Thick paper, quality stock, sealed with wax that had cracked with age. Written on the front in that same neat hand to whoever finds this. Jack opened it with fingers that barely worked. Inside, a letter typed on an old typewriter, dated August 1st, 2018, 1 week before William Barrett died. To the finder. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and this facility has passed to new ownership through exactly the unconventional means I intended. I've spent 33 years building this repository. I've filled it with wealth that I earned but never needed. Money that generated more money while I generated nothing but anxiety and isolation. What a waste. I wish I'd been less afraid. I wish I'd trusted people more. I wish I'd spent my fortune helping others instead of hoarding it against disasters that never came. But I didn't. Instead, I built this vault and convinced myself I was being prudent when really I was being a coward. I'm leaving this to chance, to fate, to providence. The property will be auctioned as surplus land. Someone desperate will buy it cheap. If they're curious enough and brave enough to explore, they'll find this vault. Everything here is legally theirs. I've already paid taxes on purchases. The estate doesn't know this exists. Clean transfer to whoever is reading this letter. My only request, and it truly is a request, not a demand because I have no right to demand anything, is this: don't do what I did. Don't hoard this wealth out of fear. Use it. Build something with it. Help people with it. Be braver than I was, kinder than I was, better than I was. You've already proven you're a survivor. You bought an abandoned facility sight unseen. You made it work. You didn't quit. That tells me you understand struggle. You understand need. I'm trusting you with 33 years of my life's work. Use this wealth to build lives worth living. Help others build lives worth living. Prove that people are better than I believed they were. Good luck. Thank you for caring enough to find this. William Barrett. Jack read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and sat in the silence of the vault, surrounded by $310 million in assets, and thought about a man he'd never met. A brilliant engineer who'd worked on Cold War defense systems. A successful businessman who'd turned military contracts into billions. A terrified human being who'd spent his fortune preparing for collapse and collapsed anyway from loneliness and regret. And somehow, through death and estate lawyers and bureaucracy and a glitch on an auction website and $750, that man's life's work had passed to a homeless ex-Marine sitting in a parking lot at 2 in the morning with a sick daughter and nowhere else to turn. Not luck, not entirely. Barrett had engineered this transfer as carefully as he'd engineered everything else, had deliberately excluded the vault from his will, had let the property be sold for pennies to whoever was desperate enough to take a chance. Jack Morrison had taken that chance, and now he held in his hands the means to do more than survive, the means to live, to build, to help others the way Barrett wished he'd help people. But first, before anything else, before plans or decisions or understanding what came next, Jack needed to tell someone, needed help, needed counsel from people who understood law and taxes and how to navigate systems designed to take wealth from people who didn't know how to protect it. He stood up slowly, turned off the vault lights, stepped back through the reinforced door, and let it seal shut behind him with that precision engineering sound of bolts engaging. Climbed the stairs to level 1 where Sophie was still sleeping, her breathing easier now that antibiotics from the medical bay were working on her chest infection. Jack pulled out the business card Ruby had given him at the gas station. Tom Russo, attorney at law, fair rates, won't rip you off. It was December 25th, Christmas Day. No lawyer would be working. But Jack called anyway because this couldn't wait, because carrying this secret alone for even one more day felt like it might crush him. The phone rang 4 times, then a voice. Russo. Mr. Russo, my name is Jack Morrison. Ruby at the gas station in Clearwater gave me your card. I bought the old Barrett facility, and I need legal help. Today, if possible. A pause. Today's Christmas. I know, I'm sorry, but this can't wait. Another pause, longer. Ruby sent you? Yes, sir. What kind of legal help are we talking about? Jack looked back toward the stairwell that led down to level 3, to the vault, to 310 million reasons why his life had just changed forever. The complicated kind, Jack said. The kind that's going to sound impossible when I try to explain it. But it's real, and I need help before anyone else finds out. How soon can you get to Colorado Springs? Jack looked at Sophie, looked at the Civic that had no battery because he'd used it to start the generator, looked at the mountain of logistics and danger and complexity that lay ahead. Give me until tomorrow. I'll be there by 0900. See you then, Mr. Morrison. Jack ended the call and sat in the silence holding a phone and a dead man's letter and the weight of more responsibility than any parking lot survivor should have to carry. Outside, snow fell on the mountain. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed and heat rose through floor tubes and water flowed through pipes. Wintervault lived, breathed, functioned. And somewhere 3 levels down, locked behind reinforced steel and digital codes and the dreams of a dead billionaire, $310 million waited to change everything. Tom Russo's office sat above a bakery on Tejon Street in Colorado Springs, and the smell of cinnamon rolls filled the stairwell, leading to the second floor like a promise that the world still contained normal things. Jack Morrison climbed those stairs with Sophie's hand in his, carrying a manila folder that held documentation of the impossible, and felt the weight of what he was about to reveal pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. The office was small, walls lined with law books and framed certificates, a desk that had seen decades of use, scarred wood that spoke to real work rather than appearance. Tom Russo stood when they entered, mid-50s, gray streaking through brown hair, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. His hands were calloused, not the soft hands of someone who'd only ever pushed paper. Working man's hands that had held tools before they'd held legal briefs. Mr. Morrison. Tom's handshake was firm, brief, professional. And this must be Sophie. Sophie nodded shyly, still recovering from her cold, clutching the stuffed bear Jack had found in the medical bay. Tom gestured to chairs. Jack sat, positioned the folder on his lap, and tried to figure out where to begin. How do you explain to a lawyer that you'd bought an abandoned bunker for $750 and found $310 million hidden inside? How do you make that sound real instead of insane? Ruby said you needed help with the Barrett facility. What kind of help are we talking about? Jack opened the folder. Inside were photographs he'd taken on his phone and printed at a library in Clearwater. The vault, the display cases, the safety deposit boxes, the master ledger showing that final assessment. $310 million in neat handwriting that belonged to a dead man. He slid the photos across the desk. Tom picked them up one by one, expression neutral. Lawyer trained not to react. But Jack saw his eyes widen slightly when he reached the photo of the ledger page. Saw him flip back through the other photos, correlating what he was seeing. Gold coins, currency, art, stock certificates. The scope of it. Mr. Morrison. Tom set the photos down carefully. Tell me everything. Start at the beginning. Don't leave anything out. So Jack told it. The job loss? The eviction? 6 weeks living in a Civic with a 7-year-old daughter. Finding the auction listing at 2 in the morning. Bidding $750 on property he'd never seen. The drive to Clearwater. Opening the bunker. Restoring power and water. Finding Barrett's journal. The code. Opening the vault. Everything. Tom listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad in shorthand Jack couldn't read. When Jack finished, silence settled over the office, broken only by the sound of traffic on Tejon Street below, and somewhere distant, a church bell marking the hour. Do you still have the auction documentation? Tom asked finally. Jack slid more papers across the desk. The auction confirmation, the deed, the title transfer, everything showing legal purchase of the property and all structures thereon. Tom reviewed each document methodically. Then he leaned back in his chair and removed his reading glasses. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need completely honest answers. Is any of this illegal? Did you steal anything? Are you in danger? Do I need to be concerned about how you acquired this property or what's in it? No, sir. I bought it legally at a government surplus auction. Everything I've shown you is exactly how I found it. William Barrett is dead. His estate sold the property. I bought it fair and square. I haven't touched anything in the vault except to document it. Tom nodded slowly. All right. I'm going to need a few hours to research some case law and consult with a colleague who specializes in estate law. Can you wait? Jack looked at Sophie, who was coloring in a notebook Tom had given her. We can wait. Tom disappeared into an inner office. Jack heard him on the phone, voice muffled through the door, heard the sound of books being pulled from shelves, pages turning. The church bell marked another hour, then another. Sophie fell asleep in her chair, exhausted by the trip down from the mountain, and Jack sat watching her breathe and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. When Tom finally emerged, he had his yellow pad covered in notes and an expression that Jack couldn't quite read. Relief maybe, or concern, or both. Okay, he said, sitting back at his desk. I've consulted with 2 colleagues and reviewed Colorado abandoned property law, estate law, and auction law. Here's what I can tell you. He opened his notepad. First, the good news. The property is legally yours. You purchased it at a legitimate auction conducted by the estate's property management company. In Colorado, everything within property boundaries at time of transfer becomes the new owner's unless specifically excluded in the sale documents. That's standard real estate law. Nothing in your auction documentation excludes the contents of any structures on the property. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, the first breath he'd taken fully since finding the vault. The more complex question is whether Barrett's estate can make a claim that the vault represents assets they didn't know about and therefore should have been included in probate. I researched William Barrett's estate settlement. It was completed in 2019, about a year after his death. Everything was liquidated or donated according to his will. The property we're discussing was listed as undeveloped land in Teller County, valued at approximately $5,000. It sold at auction after no private buyers emerged. So they didn't know what was there. Correct. And here's where it gets interesting from a legal standpoint. Tom pulled out another document, a printout of something he'd found. Barrett clearly structured his ownership to hide this facility. He used shell corporations, remote holding companies, minimal documentation. He deliberately kept it out of his estate planning. Tom slid a paper across the desk. This is Barrett's letter, the one you showed me in the photos. His documented intent is explicit. He wanted someone to find this. He wanted it to pass to a subsequent owner without estate involvement. That means he intended for exactly what happened to happen. Someone desperate buying cheap property and discovering what he'd hidden. Intent matters in law, Mr. Morrison. Barrett wanted you or someone like you to have this. He created the conditions for that transfer. You found it. You own the property it's on. And his documented intent was for the finder to inherit the contents. That's a very strong legal position. Jack heard the word becoming, but it needs to be done correctly, transparently. We need to establish clear ownership, document everything, and most importantly, handle the tax implications properly. Tom leaned forward. While you legally own these assets, the moment you liquidate them, sell the gold, sell the art, access those stock certificates or cryptocurrency, that becomes taxable income. The IRS will want their share. Capital gains tax on anything you sell. We're talking about 47% of liquidated value going to taxes. And if we don't handle this properly from the start, you could face audits, penalties, criminal charges for tax evasion. What do I need to do? You need to hire me, bro. Full disclosure, this is the most unusual case I've encountered in 23 years of practice. It's also potentially the most important. If we do this right, you're looking at life-changing wealth managed properly. If we do it wrong, you're looking at legal problems that could tie everything up for years or cost you everything. What's your fee? Tom paused. I normally charge $250 an hour. For something like this, that could add up fast. I'm willing to work on contingency if needed. 5% of whatever we successfully establish as your legal assets. That ensures my interests align with yours. I want to establish the highest possible legal value because it benefits both of us. But Mr. Morrison, if you can't afford hourly fees right now, I understand. We can structure this however works for you. Jack did the math quickly. 5% of $310 million was over $15 million. That was a lot of money, but it was also fair compensation for the work involved, and more importantly, it meant Tom had skin in the game. Contingency is fine, 5% is fair. When can we start? Tom smiled for the first time. We already have. First thing Monday morning, I'm filing documentation with Teller County, establishing your ownership of the property and all contents. Then we're filing with the IRS, establishing intent to declare income from asset liquidation. Everything transparent, everything by the book. No room for anyone to claim you tried to hide wealth or evade taxes. How long will this take? Weeks, maybe months. We need to bring in appraisers for the coins, the art, the collectibles. We need forensic accountants to verify the stock certificates and bonds. We need everything documented and authenticated before we can establish clear value and clear ownership. But Mr. Morrison, if we do this right, you're going to be a very wealthy man. Jack looked at Sophie sleeping in the chair, thought about parking lots and cold nights and the sound of her coughing in the darkness. Thought about William Barrett dying alone, regretting that he'd built walls instead of relationships, hoping someone would use his wealth better than he had. I don't want to be wealthy, Jack said quietly. I want my daughter to be safe. I want to help people who are where I was 6 weeks ago. I want to use this the way Barrett wanted it used, to build something, to give people second chances. Tom studied him for a long moment. Then you're exactly the kind of person Barrett was hoping would find this. Let's make sure we protect it so you can do that. They spent the next 3 weeks in careful documentation. Tom brought in specialists, each one required to sign non-disclosure agreements before even learning what they were appraising. A numismatist from Denver who spent 4 days examining every coin in the collection, verifying authenticity, grading condition, establishing market value. Final assessment, $53.8 million, higher than Barrett's estimate because several rare pieces had appreciated significantly. An art authenticator from Santa Fe who examined provenance documentation and used specialized equipment to verify age and authenticity of paintings and sculptures. Final assessment, $38.2 million. A forensic accountant who tracked down which companies still honored old paper stock certificates, what those shares were worth after decades of splits and growth, which bonds were still valid. Final assessment, $167.4 million, much higher than Barrett's numbers because several tech stocks had exploded in value. The total after 3 weeks of exhaustive documentation came to $327.6 million, $17 million more than Barrett's final estimate, thanks to market appreciation and his conservative initial valuations. Tom filed paperwork with Teller County, establishing Jack's ownership of the property and all contents, filed documentation with the IRS establishing intent to declare income from asset liquidation, structured everything transparently, proactively, leaving no room for future questions about legitimacy or intent to hide wealth. The key is we're not trying to avoid taxes or hide anything. We're establishing clear ownership and then following every rule precisely. The IRS appreciates that approach. Courts appreciate it, and it protects you from anyone who might later claim you did something improper. Jack appreciated the caution even though part of him wanted to just sell everything immediately and start helping people. But he understood. Doing it right meant doing it slowly, carefully, with every step documented and legal. Anything else risked losing everything to lawsuits or government seizure. Then on January 3rd, Derek Barrett appeared. Jack was at Winter Vault, organizing level 2 storage rooms, taking inventory of supplies that might be useful, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Morrison. Congratulations on your discovery. We should talk. Derek Barrett. Jack stared at the message. Derek Barrett, William's nephew. How did he know? How had he found out? A second text arrived before Jack could process the first. I'm William's nephew, rightful heir. What you found isn't yours. We can settle this civilly or you can fight a legal battle you'll lose. Your choice. Jack's jaw tightened. His Marine training kicked in, the automatic assessment of threats. This wasn't a physical threat. This was legal warfare, the kind fought in courtrooms with lawyers instead of rifles, but warfare nonetheless. A third text. I know you have a daughter. I know you're living in that facility. I know you're vulnerable. Let's talk tomorrow. I'll be at the facility at 1000 hours. Come to the entrance. We'll discuss terms. Jack deleted the text, checked the security of the outer door, retrieved the Sig Sauer P226 he'd found in Barrett's quarters, checked the magazine, chambered around. He wasn't planning to use it, but he'd learned in Afghanistan that being prepared for violence often prevented violence. He called Tom immediately. We've got a problem. Tom listened as Jack explained the text, then silence on the line for a long moment. Don't respond to anything without consulting me first. And Jack, don't talk to him again without me present. I'm coming up there tomorrow. Don't let him in the facility. Don't let him see anything. We meet him outside. We hear what he has to say. and we tell him to contact my office for any further communication. Understood? Understood. The next morning, Jack was ready. He'd positioned Sophie in the common room on level 1 with instructions not to come upstairs no matter what she heard. Had the cig tucked in his waistband under his jacket, safety on but accessible. Had Tom's number on speed dial. Had his Marine Corps mindset fully engaged, calm and alert and ready for anything. At exactly 1000 hours, a black Mercedes SUV pulled into the clearing. The door opened and a man stepped out. Mid-40s, expensive suit that looked ridiculous in the mountain snow, Italian shoes already caked with mud, dark hair graying at the temples, cold eyes that assessed the facility, the Civic, Jack himself with the calculation of someone used to evaluating assets. Derek Barrett walked toward the entrance like he owned it. Jack stepped out to meet him, closing the outer door behind him, blocking access. "Mr. Morrison," Derek extended his hand. Jack didn't take it. "What do you want?" Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Straight to business. I respect that." He pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I'll be direct. William Barrett was my uncle, my mother's half-brother. They had different mothers, complicated family dynamics, but blood is blood." Jack waited. "When my uncle died, estate lawyers were supposed to locate all heirs. They found none. William never married, had no children, had alienated most of the family. The estate was liquidated, everything sold off or donated. But they missed something." He gestured at the facility. "This place, Winter Vault, and everything in it. I've done my research, Mr. Morrison. I know what's down there. I know what it's worth. The coins, the art, the bearer bonds, the stocks. $300 million, give or take." "How do you know what's in there?" Derek smiled. "I have my sources. People talk. Appraisers sign NDAs, but they have colleagues. Information leaks. The point is, I know. And legally, that vault represents assets that should have been included in estate probate. They weren't. As William's blood relative, I have standing to contest your ownership." He slid documents across the space between them. "I've already filed a claim in Teller County Court contesting your ownership of the vault contents. You'll be served officially within 48 hours. However, I'm a reasonable man. Litigation is expensive, time-consuming, outcome uncertain. So I'm prepared to settle this right now, today, and save us both a lot of trouble." "What kind of settlement?" 80% to me, 20% to you. That's still over $60 million for you, Mr. Morrison. More than enough for a comfortable life. You keep the facility if you want it. I take the contents. You avoid a legal battle you're likely to lose. Courts tend to favor blood relatives over opportunistic strangers who got lucky at an auction. No offense intended. Jack felt rage building in his chest, the kind he'd learned to control in combat because uncontrolled anger got people killed. He kept his voice level. "I need to talk to my lawyer." "You do that." Derek handed him a business card. "My attorney's information is on the back. Have your lawyer call mine. But Mr. Morrison, I'd advise you not to wait too long, and I'd strongly advise against liquidating any assets before this is settled. That could be construed as intent to defraud rightful heirs. Could turn this from a civil matter into a criminal one." He walked back to his Mercedes, paused with the door open. "Oh, and one more thing. I know you're living here with your daughter, isolated, vulnerable. No neighbors for miles. You might want to think about her safety when you're considering your options. This mountain can be dangerous. Accidents happen." The threat wasn't even veiled. It hung in the cold air like frost. Derek got in his vehicle and drove away, leaving Jack standing in the snow with rage and fear competing for dominance. He waited until the sound of the engine faded completely, then pulled out his phone and called Tom. He was here. He threatened us. We need to meet. Now. Tom arrived 3 hours later with 2 other people. A woman in her 50s, professional but not showy, carrying a briefcase that had seen real use. A man, maybe 60, with the bearing of someone who'd spent time in uniform. Tom made introductions. "This is Patricia Moss, former IRS criminal investigator, now in private practice. And this is Frank Chen, retired FBI. I've brought them in as consultants because Derek Barrett just escalated this beyond simple estate law." They sat in the common room, Sophie doing homework at a table across the room, while Jack recounted everything Derek had said, the 80-20 offer, the threats about liquidation being criminal, the veiled threat about Sophie's safety in an isolated location. Patricia spoke first. "The threat about criminal charges is garbage. You haven't liquidated anything yet. You've done everything transparently. The IRS has all our documentation. There's no criminal exposure here. He's bluffing to scare you. Frank leaned forward. The threat about your daughter's safety is more concerning. That's intimidation, possibly criminal in itself. But it's also vague enough that you can't prosecute. He's careful. This isn't his first time applying pressure. What do we know about him? Jack asked. Tom opened a file. Derek Barrett, age 44, works in private equity in Denver. Moderately successful, but he's had some bad investments in the last few years. Our research suggests he's facing financial pressure. Not bankrupt, but trending that direction, which explains why he's coming after this so aggressively. So he needs the money, desperately, and he's willing to fight dirty to get it. But Jack, he's got a problem. William specifically excluded him. Tom pulled out a document. This is a letter dated April 12, 2016. From William Barrett to his attorney of record, David Melbourne, notarized and filed according to Colorado law. He read aloud, David, this letter serves as formal instruction regarding my estate. My half-sister Diane has contacted me after 40 years claiming she wants reconciliation. I know it's about money. It always is with her. I want it on record. Diane and her descendants receive nothing from my estate. I specifically and explicitly disinherit Diane Barrett and all her heirs. Furthermore, Winterval Holdings and all associated properties are excluded from my estate. They do not pass through probate. They belong to whoever finds them after I'm gone. This is my will. This is my intent. Honor it. William Barrett. Silence settled over the room. Jack processed this. Derek's mother was Diane. William had explicitly disinherited her and all her descendants, had known about her attempt at reconciliation and rejected it, had legally documented that rejection. Does Derek know about this letter? Not yet. It was buried in William's attorney's files. We only found it because we did exhaustive research. This is our ace. When Derek files his claim formally, we present this in court. It destroys his legal standing completely. When's the hearing? Tom checked his notes. Teller County Courthouse. Judge Martha Carrion presiding. 3 weeks from now, January 24th. The next 20 days were the longest of Jack's life. Living in Wintervault felt different now. Not like refuge, but like a target. He installed motion sensors around the perimeter, simple battery-powered units from a hardware store that would alert his phone if anyone approached. Kept a SIG within reach at all times. Slept light, the way he'd slept in combat zones, aware of every sound. Sophie sensed the tension, even though Jack tried to hide it. She asked questions he couldn't fully answer. Why did that man come here? Are we in trouble? Do we have to leave? No, sweetheart. We're not leaving. This is our home. We're just dealing with some grown-up problems. It'll be okay. But he wasn't sure it would be okay. Derek had resources, had lawyers, had the advantage of blood relation that courts historically favored. And he had nothing to lose, which made him dangerous in ways that physical threats weren't. 5 days after Derek's visit, a sheriff's deputy came to the facility with official papers. Service of lawsuit. Jack was being sued for possession of assets rightfully belonging to the Barrett estate. Court date January 24th. He signed for the papers and watched the deputy drive away. 3 days later came the investigators. First was Sheriff Wade Harrison from Teller County. Early 50s, weathered face, eyes that had seen their share of trouble. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you some questions about your situation here. Jack led him to the common room. Wade pulled out a notebook. I've been getting questions about you. You bought this property for $750. That's public record. Now suddenly, I'm hearing about you making anonymous donations around Clearwater. School district got $50,000. Community center got $30,000. Library got $25,000. Where's that money coming from, Mr. Morrison? Jack had anticipated this. Tom had coached him. I found valuable items left behind by the previous owner. I'm working with a lawyer to properly report everything to the appropriate authorities. Everything's being done legally and transparently. Wade wrote in his notebook. Previous owner being William Barrett. Yes, sir. Who's been dead 5 years? Yes, sir. And these valuable items? How valuable are we talking? I'd rather not say until my lawyer advises me that it's appropriate. Wade closed his notebook, looked at Jack steadily. Mr. Morrison, I'll be direct with you. I don't know if you found pirate treasure or stumbled into something that's going to blow up in your face, but I need to verify nothing criminal is going on here. I'll be conducting an inquiry. Expect more questions. 2 days after Wade came Patricia Moss, but not as their consultant, as an IRS criminal investigator on official business. Mr. Morrison, I need to examine your facility and your records. I have a warrant. She handed him legal documents. Jack called Tom immediately. Don't let her see the vault. Not yet. Let her see the facility. Let her see that you're living here legitimately, but the vault stays sealed until we have our legal standing confirmed. The warrant only covers the facility itself, not locked secured areas. Tom arrived within the hour. Negotiated with Patricia. They compromised. She could inspect the living areas, could verify Jack and Sophie actually resided there, could examine the generator and water systems that proved habitability. But the vault on level 3 remained sealed, combination known only to Jack, contents protected by legal privilege until the court case was resolved. Patricia spent 4 hours walking through Wintervault, taking notes, photographing systems. When she left, she handed Jack a thick packet of IRS forms. Fill these out. Provide documentation for all income and expenditures for the past 5 years. We'll be conducting a full audit. Tax evasion is a federal crime, Mr. Morrison. I assume you understand the seriousness. She drove away in a government sedan, leaving Jack holding forms that represented the government's interest in wealth they now knew existed but couldn't yet touch. The night before the hearing, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk watching shadows on the concrete ceiling and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Derek could win. The judge could rule that blood relation trumped documented intent. The vault could be seized, liquidated, distributed to a man who'd use it to pay off bad investments instead of helping people who actually needed help. And even if they won, even if the disinheritance letter did its job, there would be taxes. 47% of everything liquidated going to the government. Then Tom's 5%. Then the cost of actually helping people, of building something sustainable, rather than just giving away money that would be gone in a generation. The weight of it pressed down like the mountain above. Sophie stirred in the bunk below his. Dad, you awake? Yeah, sweetheart. Are you scared? Jack climbed down, sat on the edge of her bunk. A little, but being scared is okay. It means you understand what's at stake. What's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. We're Morrisons. We don't quit. She hugged him. Jack held his daughter in the darkness of an underground facility bought for $750 and containing $300 million in hidden wealth, and made a promise to himself and to her and to the memory of William Barrett, who'd engineered this whole impossible transfer. If they won tomorrow, he'd use this wealth the way it was meant to be used. To build, to help, to give people the second chances he'd been given. Not for glory or recognition, but because it was right. Because Barrett had trusted him to be better than fear and greed. And if they lost, well, they'd still have the facility, still have shelter and power and water, still have each other. They'd survived with less. They could survive with this. Morning came cold and clear. Jack dressed in the only decent clothes he owned, khakis and a button-up shirt that were wrinkled from being packed in a garbage bag for months. Sophie wore her best dress, the one she'd worn to her mother's funeral 3 years ago and had almost outgrown. They drove to Colorado Springs in the Civic that Jack had somehow coaxed back to life with a replacement battery. Arrived at the Teller County Courthouse 30 minutes early. Tom was waiting on the steps with his worn briefcase in his working man's hands and his 23 years of experience that Jack was trusting with everything. Ready? As I'll ever be. They walked inside together, footsteps echoing off marble floors, and prepared to fight for a future that hung in the balance between documented intent and blood claim, between a dead man's wishes and a desperate nephew's greed. The courtroom was already half full. Local reporters who'd gotten wind of something interesting, curious residents, Sheriff Wade Harrison in the back row, Patricia Moss taking notes. And at the plaintiff's table, Derek Barrett with 3 attorneys from a high-powered Denver firm, designer suits and matching leather portfolios, and the confidence of people who won most of their cases. Jack sat at the defendant's table with Tom and felt like David facing Goliath. Except he didn't even have a sling. Judge Martha Carrion entered. 60-something, gray hair pulled back, sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. Reputation for no-nonsense rulings and low tolerance for legal theatrics. She looked at both tables, then at the packed gallery. This is Barrett versus Morrison. Claim for estate assets. Let's proceed. And with those words, the battle for Wintervault's fortune began. The courtroom had the particular silence that comes before storms, the kind Jack Morrison remembered from Afghanistan, when the air pressure dropped and you knew contact was coming, but not when or from where. Judge Martha Carrion sat elevated behind her bench, looking down at both legal teams with eyes that had seen every courtroom trick and tolerated none of them. The gallery behind Jack was full of people whose lives this decision wouldn't touch, watching human drama unfold like theater. But for Jack, this was everything. This was Sophie's future. This was the difference between honoring a dead man's trust and watching vultures pick apart his legacy. Derek Barrett's lead attorney stood first. Richard Sutherland, all polish and expensive haircut, the kind of lawyer who billed $800 an hour and made sure everyone knew it. He approached the bench with the confidence of someone who'd won most of his cases through sheer intimidation and unlimited resources. Your Honor, this case is straightforward despite my opponent's attempts to complicate it. The facts are simple. William Barrett died intestate regarding specific assets. His will made no mention of Wintervault Holdings or this underground facility. Estate lawyers, acting in good faith, failed to locate all heirs during probate. My client, Derek Barrett, is William's nephew through his half-sister Diane. Blood relation, Your Honor, documented and verified. Sutherland placed genealogy charts on the evidence table. Birth certificates, DNA test results. Documentation proving Derek's mother was William's half-sister, different mothers but same father. Born 1955 when William was already 8 years old. Under Colorado probate law, when a deceased person dies without a spouse or children, estate assets pass to siblings or their descendants. Derek's mother, Diane, passed away in 2015, but Derek, as her direct descendant, has legitimate standing as an heir. He pulled out more documents, architectural surveys, photographs that Jack recognized as coming from one of the appraisers who'd violated their NDA. This facility contains assets valued at over $300 million. Rare coins, fine art, bearer bonds, stock certificates, cryptocurrency holdings. None of this was included in the 2019 estate settlement because estate lawyers didn't know it existed. But ignorance doesn't change legal reality. These are estate assets that should have been distributed to rightful heirs. Sutherland turned to face Jack directly, a calculated move designed to intimidate. Mr. Morrison purchased the property, yes, a piece of land, but the contents of a sealed vault were never part of that sale. They remain in estate assets. My client doesn't dispute Mr. Morrison's ownership of the real estate. He can keep his bunker. But the contents, the $300 million in assets that should have gone through probate, those belong to the rightful heir, to family, to blood, who he returned to the bench. Your Honor, we're not trying to take anything from Mr. Morrison that legitimately belongs to him. We're simply asking the court to recognize that certain assets were improperly excluded from estate proceedings and should now be distributed according to Colorado law. This isn't complicated. It's basic estate law applied to unusual circumstances. Sutherland sat down. Derek leaned over and whispered something to him, both men looking satisfied like this was already decided. Tom Russo stood slowly. He didn't have Sutherland's polish or expensive suit. His briefcase was scuffed leather that had seen decades of use. His reading glasses were crooked. But when he spoke, his voice carried weight that had nothing to do with presentation and everything to do with substance. Your Honor, my opponent is correct that this case involves unusual circumstances, but he's fundamentally wrong about what those circumstances mean legally. Tom approached the bench carrying a single folder. This isn't a typical probate case. This is a case about documented intent, about a man who spent 33 years building something specific and deliberately structuring its transfer outside normal estate channels. William Barrett wasn't ignorant or forgetful. He was intentional. He opened the folder and removed William's letter, the one addressed to whoever finds this, and handed it to the judge. Judge Carrion read silently, her expression neutral, but her eyes moving carefully over every word. The courtroom waited. Jack could hear his own heartbeat, could hear Sophie shifting in her seat behind him, could hear Derek breathing 3 tables away, probably wondering what Tom had just introduced. Your Honor, Tom continued, William Barrett explicitly states his intent in this letter, written 1 week before his death when he knew cancer was killing him. He says, and I quote, I'm leaving this to chance, to whoever finds it, not to family, not to estate lawyers. He wanted someone desperate to discover it. someone who'd fight to stay, someone who'd use the wealth better than he did. Tom pulled out more documents. But it's not just the letter. Barrett created Wintervault Holdings in 1996 specifically to hide this facility from estate proceedings. Used shell corporations, kept minimal paper trails, maintained the facility personally for 22 years so no contractors or employees would know about it. This wasn't accidental obscurity. This was systematic, deliberate concealment. He placed maintenance logs on the evidence table, Barrett's handwriting visible even from where Jack sat. Every month for 22 years, William Barrett drove to this remote facility and checked systems personally. Generator, water, power, ventilation. He recorded everything in these logs. The last entry is dated July 14, 2018, 4 weeks before he died. It says, and I quote, "God willing, someone will find this worthy of the care I've given it." Tom turned to face Derek. Mr. Barrett wants the court to believe his uncle simply forgot to include $300 million in his estate planning. But the evidence shows William forgot nothing. He planned this transfer meticulously. He wanted it to pass outside normal channels to someone who needed it, not to relatives who'd been estranged for decades. Sutherland stood. "Objection, Your Honor. My client's family relationship isn't relevant to estate law." Tom didn't wait for the judge to rule. "Actually, Your Honor, it's extremely relevant because William Barrett explicitly addressed that relationship in legal documents." He pulled out the letter from 2016, the one they'd found in the attorney's files. This is a notarized letter dated April 12, 2016, from William Barrett to his attorney of record, filed according to Colorado law and properly witnessed. He handed it to Judge Carrion. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read. Tom read aloud for the courtroom. "David, this letter serves as formal instruction regarding my estate. My half-sister Diane has contacted me after 40 years claiming reconciliation. I know it's about money. It always is with her. I want it on record. Diane and her descendants receive nothing from my estate. I specifically and explicitly disinherit Diane Barrett and all her heirs." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Derek's face went red, then white. Sutherland grabbed for the document, but the judge held it. Tom continued reading. "Furthermore, Wintervault Holdings and all associated properties are excluded from my estate. They do not pass through probate. They belong to whoever finds them after I'm gone. This is my will. This is my intent. Honor it." Judge Carrion looked at Derek. "Mr. Barrett, were you aware of this letter?" Derek opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sutherland stepped in. "Your Honor, we were not aware. We questioned the authenticity." Tom pulled out more papers. "It's notarized, filed with the Colorado Bar Association. Attorney David Melbourne, who drafted William's primary will, confirms receiving and filing this letter per his client's specific instructions. It's dated 2016, 2 years before William died, which means he had time to change his mind if he'd wanted to. He didn't. This letter represents his final documented intent regarding both his half-sister's family and Wintervault." Judge Carrion leaned back in her chair. She looked at Derek, at his expensive lawyers, at their genealogy charts and DNA tests. Then she looked at Jack, sitting next to Tom in his wrinkled khakis. "Mr. Sutherland, your client was explicitly disinherited. Your entire case rests on blood relation giving your client standing as an heir. But the deceased specifically and legally rejected that relationship. How do you respond?" Sutherland scrambled. "Your Honor, we request a continuance. This evidence is new. We need time to examine authenticity, to research precedent." "Denied." Judge Carrion's voice was sharp. "This letter is properly notarized and filed. You had access to the same public records as the defense. Your failure to discover it is not grounds for delay." She turned to Tom. "Mr. Russo, does the defense have additional evidence?" Tom called Jack to the stand. Jack walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from his body, was sworn in, sat in the witness chair facing the judge in the courtroom and Derek's cold eyes. Tom kept it simple, no theatrics, just questions that established facts. "Mr. Morrison, tell the court how you came to purchase this property." Jack explained. "Lost his job at Davidson's Auto, lost his apartment, lived in a car with his daughter for 6 weeks. Found the auction listing at 2 in the morning while searching desperately for shelter. Bid $750, nearly everything he had left. What were you looking for when you bid on this property?" "A place where my daughter could be warm, safe, where she could stop coughing from sleeping in a cold car." "And what did you find?" "An underground facility, professional construction, systems that still worked, and eventually a vault with a letter from William Barrett explaining what he wanted done with what was inside. Tom showed him the letter. "Is this the letter you found?" "Yes, sir." "What did you do after finding the vault?" "I contacted a lawyer. I wanted to do everything legally, everything transparent. I didn't want to hide anything or take anything that wasn't rightfully mine." "Have you liquidated any assets from the vault?" "No, sir. Not until the legal questions are resolved." "Why not?" "Because Mr. Barrett trusted whoever found this to do it right, to use it to help people. Taking the money before establishing clear legal ownership would be the opposite of that trust." Tom sat down. Sutherland stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Morrison, you claim you were homeless, living in a car, desperate for shelter, yet you somehow had $750 to gamble on an unknown property?" "It wasn't a gamble. It was calculated risk. I'm a mechanic. I understand systems." The listing said military-grade construction, hardened facility. That meant it would be structurally sound even if it needed work. "But you'd never seen it?" "No, sir." "Never inspected it?" "No, sir. Just took a chance." "Yes, sir. Marines are trained to take calculated risks when the alternative is worse." Sutherland paced. "And when you found $300 million hidden inside, you didn't think that belonged to anyone else? Didn't think to contact William Barrett's estate?" "I contacted a lawyer within 48 hours of finding the vault. We researched the estate settlement, found that it was closed, found that the property had been legally sold through proper channels, found William's letter explaining his intent." "Convenient that you found a letter saying you should keep everything." Jack's jaw tightened. "I didn't write that letter, sir. William Barrett did, 1 week before he died, when he knew exactly what he was doing and who he wanted to have this wealth." Sutherland tried a different angle. "You've made donations, large anonymous donations around Clearwater. Where did that money come from if you haven't liquidated vault assets?" "Personal savings from before I became homeless. Money I'd set aside but hadn't needed to spend yet." "How much?" "Around $100,000. "You had $100,000 in savings but were living in a car?" Jack's voice hardened. "I had that money set aside for my daughter's future, for college, for emergencies. I wasn't going to touch it just to rent an apartment I'd lose again when I couldn't make the next month's payment. I used it for shelter I could own, for helping other people in situations like mine. That's what William Barrett wanted." Sutherland realized he was losing ground, sat down abruptly. Judge Carrion called Derek to testify. Derek took the stand with the confidence of someone who'd never really been challenged. Told a story of a strange family, his mother Diane reaching out to Uncle William late in life and being cruelly rejected. Painted himself as the victim of a bitter old man's grudges. "My mother died hoping for reconciliation that never came. She deserved better. Our family deserved better." Tom stood for cross. "Mr. Barrett, what would you do with this wealth if the court awarded it to you?" Derek didn't hesitate. "Invest it properly, ensure it generates returns for years to come. Establish a family trust. Make sure the Barrett legacy continues appropriately. And helping others? Charitable work?" Derek paused just slightly. "Of course, eventually. But first priority would be securing the assets, making sure they're managed by professionals, not just given away emotionally." He glanced at Jack with barely concealed contempt. Tom pulled out financial records. "Mr. Barrett, you work in private equity in Denver, correct?" "Yes." "And your last 3 major investments lost money, correct?" Derek's face flushed. "The market is volatile. Not all investments succeed. You're facing personal financial pressure. Your home is mortgaged. You have significant debt. This lawsuit appeared right when you needed money most. Isn't that true?" "I'm exercising my legal rights as an heir. Rights that your uncle explicitly denied you in a notarized legal document." Tom let that hang. Derek had no answer. Tom called one final witness, a professor of estate law from University of Colorado. Expert testimony about testamentary intent, about how courts interpret wishes of the deceased when those wishes are clearly documented. When a deceased person creates elaborate structures to ensure assets pass outside normal channels, and documents that intent explicitly in writing, courts generally honor that intent. The letter Mr. Barrett left is extraordinarily clear. He wanted the finder to inherit. That's dispositive in Colorado law. Judge Carrion called for closing arguments. Sutherland stood first, but his confidence was gone. "Your Honor, blood relation has historically been the foundation of inheritance law. Regardless of personal grudges or family disputes, legal principles should prevail over emotional appeals." But even he sounded uncertain now. Tom stood last. "Your Honor, this case is about one question. What did William Barrett want? Not what we think is fair, not what traditional estate law might suggest in normal circumstances. What did this specific man with this specific fortune specifically intend? He pointed to the letters, the maintenance logs, the documented history of deliberate concealment and planned transfer. William Barrett made his wishes crystal clear. He disinherited Derek's family line explicitly. He excluded Wintervault from his estate deliberately. He left a letter explaining exactly who should inherit and why. Someone desperate, someone brave, someone who'd use the wealth to help others instead of hoarding it in fear. Tom gestured to Jack. Mr. Morrison bought property legally, explored it thoroughly, found what William wanted found, and did exactly what William hoped someone would do. Contacted lawyers, established transparency, planned to use the wealth for good. He is precisely the person William Barrett engineered this entire transfer to reach. Tom returned to the table. The law should honor William's intent, his right to dispose of his wealth as he saw fit, his right to choose recipients based on character rather than blood. That's what we're asking the court to do. Honor a dead man's wishes. Judge Carrion looked at both tables, looked at Derek and his expensive lawyers and his genealogy charts that meant nothing against explicit disinheritance, looked at Jack and Tom and their simple case built on documented truth. I'm ready to rule. The courtroom held its breath. This court finds that William Barrett's testamentary intent is clear and legally binding. The letter dated April 2016 explicitly disinherits Diane Barrett and all her descendants. The letter found in the vault explicitly bequeaths the contents to whoever discovers them. Mr. Morrison purchased the property through legal channels and inherited the contents per the deceased's documented wishes. Her gavel came down. The motion to contest ownership is denied. All assets within Wintervault remain the legal property of Jack Morrison. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for doors. Derek stood abruptly, face purple with rage. Sutherland grabbed his arm, pulled him back down, probably saving him from contempt charges. Jack sat very still, unable to process what had just happened. Tom gripped his shoulder. It's over. You won. Sophie ran from the gallery and threw her arms around Jack's neck. Daddy, what does that mean? It means it's really ours, Princess. It means we can help people now. Outside the courthouse, Clearwater residents waited. Ruby from the gas station hugged Jack hard enough to crack ribs. Proud of you, son. Don't let lawyers and money change who you are. Sheriff Wade approached, hand extended. Mr. Morrison, I owe you an apology. Was just doing my job, making sure nothing criminal was happening. I'm glad it worked out. No hard feelings, Sheriff. Jack shook his hand. Actually, I wanted to ask about security. The facility's isolated. Word is out now about what's there. I need to protect it. I'll have deputies patrol that road regular. And I know a guy, retired Marine, runs a security company out of Colorado Springs. Good people. Want his number? Please. Patricia Moss waited by her government car. Not as their consultant now, but as official IRS representative. She approached with a folder. Mr. Morrison, congratulations on your legal victory. Now we need to discuss taxes. She handed him documents. You're going to pay approximately 47% in capital gains when you liquidate assets. File quarterly estimates. Keep detailed records of every transaction. Do that and we have no issues. She almost smiled. You're actually going to pay more tax than required, you know. Most people in your position hire expensive accountants to minimize liability. You're surprisingly honest for someone who just won $300 million. I've got nothing to hide. And William Barrett wanted this used for good. That includes paying what's owed. Patricia shook his hand. Good luck, Mr. Morrison. Try not to let wealth ruin you. Most people can't handle it. She drove away and Jack was left standing on courthouse steps, holding custody of a fortune that would change everything. Tom laid out next steps over coffee at a diner near the courthouse. First, we liquidate carefully. Start with a small portion of the gold. Test the process. Verify the tax procedures work. Then gradually access other assets as we need funding for your plans. What kind of plans are we talking about? Tom pulled out notes they'd made during long conversations at Wintervault while waiting for the trial. You mentioned an automotive training program, teaching mechanics to people who need skills and second chances. That's solid. Apprenticeships, living wages while they learn, job placement after. We could start with 6 people, scale from there. Jack nodded. What else? Transitional housing. Buy apartment buildings, renovate them, provide free or subsidized housing for families getting back on their feet. No credit checks, no background requirements, just commitment to try. And a foundation, something that coordinates everything, handles applications, vets people who need help, makes sure resources go to those who use them well. How much would all that cost? Initial investment, maybe 5 million, but we structure it to be sustainable. The foundation's endowment generates returns that fund ongoing operations. We're not just giving away money, we're building systems that help people help themselves. Jack thought about parking lots and cold nights and the sound of Sophie coughing, thought about Marcus Webb somewhere struggling with PTSD and unemployment, thought about families like the Rodriguezes losing everything to medical bills and bad luck. When can we start? Tom smiled. Monday. They started with a modest portion of the gold coin collection, worked with a reputable dealer in Denver who authenticated pieces and offered fair market value. The transaction generated $2.3 million. After capital gains taxes at 47%, Jack cleared $1.2 million. His first million. Money that was actually his, sitting in a bank with his name on it, real and spendable and frightening in its implications. Jack's priorities were methodical, the way he approached everything. First came personal security. He purchased a house in Clearwater, 3-bedroom ranch on 2 acres that needed work but had good bones. The kind of place Sophie could have friends over without embarrassment. The kind of place with a yard and trees and normal problems like lawn mowing instead of survival. Price was $285,000. Jack paid cash. He furnished it simply. Comfortable couches that could take abuse, a kitchen table where Sophie could do homework, beds that were actually comfortable instead of plastic-wrapped bunks. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth, just normal middle-class comfort that felt like luxury after months of homelessness. He bought a reliable vehicle, a 3-year-old Toyota Highlander that started every time and had working heat in enough space to haul tools or supplies or people who needed rides. Paid $38,000 cash. Established a college fund for Sophie that would grow for the next decade. $500,000 invested conservatively, enough to pay for any university she wanted without loans or debt. Set up emergency funds, insurance policies, all the boring financial infrastructure that kept people safe when unexpected problems emerged. Total spent on personal security, just under $600,000. It felt like an impossible amount. It felt like nothing compared to what remained. Second came purpose. In April, Jack purchased a vacant garage on Clearwater's Main Street. The building had sat empty for 2 years since the previous owner retired. Jack spent 6 weeks renovating it himself, working alongside local contractors he paid fairly for their expertise. New lifts that could handle anything from compact cars to diesel trucks. Diagnostic equipment that could read computer systems in modern vehicles. Hand tools arranged on pegboards the way his father had taught him. Paint on walls so the space felt clean and professional. Photographs of classic cars hung because beauty mattered even in workplaces. The sign went up on a Wednesday morning. Morrison Automotive. Honest work, fair prices, second chances. That last part was deliberate. Jack didn't just want to fix cars. He wanted to train people who needed what he'd once needed. Skills, dignity, a path forward when every other door had closed. He partnered with Community College in Colorado Springs to create an apprenticeship program. 6 months of training, full-time hours, living wage while they learn. Priority given to people getting back on their feet. Formerly homeless. Single parents. People with criminal records who couldn't get hired elsewhere. Veterans struggling with civilian transition. Ray Torres walked into the shop on the first Monday in May. 52 years old, Army veteran, Iraq deployment, honorably discharged. PTSD made holding jobs difficult. He'd lost his apartment, lost custody of his teenage son, was living at a Denver homeless shelter when someone told him about Morrison's program. He stood in the doorway like he expected to be turned away, looked at Jack with eyes that recognized another veteran, another survivor. I saw your sign, the apprenticeship thing. That real or just talk? It's real. You have any experience with cars? No, sir, but I can follow instructions. Show up on time, work hard. He paused. I just need somebody to give me a shot. Jack recognized the desperation in his voice because he'd heard it in his own not that long ago. When can you start? Now, today, whenever you want. Tomorrow morning, 0700, bring work boots and a willingness to learn. That's all you need. Ray showed up at 0645 the next morning. Kept showing it up every morning after. Never late, never making excuses. Jack taught him everything: how engines worked, the relationship between combustion and power, how to diagnose problems by listening to sounds most people ignored, how to rebuild transmissions, replace brake systems, read electrical diagrams. Ray's hands were steady even when his mind wasn't. He found focus in precision mechanical work, found purpose in making broken things whole. By October, Ray was confident, skilled, ready. Jack helped him open Torres Mobile Repair, a truck-based service with lower overhead and flexibility that suited his needs. Co-signed the loan for his truck and tools, knowing the risk but believing in the man. Ray's first month was slow, just 2 or 3 clients. Second month, word spread about quality work at fair prices. By third month, he was booked solid, turning away business, thinking about expansion. He came back to Morrison Automotive one Saturday morning with an envelope. First loan payment plus interest. Ray, we agreed you didn't need to pay interest. The terms clearly stated that. I know what the terms say, but I want to pay interest. You gave me my life back, Jack. This is how I say thank you. This is how I show you it mattered. The wall in Jack's office at Morrison Automotive held photographs of every person who'd come through the apprenticeship program. 23 faces by Christmas, each one with a story of transformation written in the lines around their eyes and how they smiled for the camera. Ray's photo was first, upper left corner, a reminder of where this all started. In July, Jack purchased an abandoned building on Clearwater's Main Street, brick structure that had once been a hardware store before big box retailers killed small-town commerce. He converted it into 6 apartments, each one fully furnished with furniture that was practical and comfortable. Free rent for up to 1 year while residents got back on their feet. No credit checks, no background requirements, just commitment to try. The Rodriguez family moved in first. Miguel, 37, had been a construction worker until a job site accident crushed his left hand. Sophia, 35, worked part-time as a cashier while managing care for their 2 kids, Camila, 10, and Diego, 7. Medical bills from Miguel's injury had consumed their savings, then their apartment, then their dignity. They'd cycled through shelters and their car and shelters again. Sophia filled out the application with shaking hands. Things like this don't happen to people like us. There's always a catch. No catch, just an opportunity. Jack approved them immediately, provided first month's expenses, enrolled Miguel in computer training classes so he could transition from physical labor to office work, arranged childcare assistance so Sophia could take a full-time position. 8 months later, Miguel worked as a dispatcher for a construction company, coordinating crews and schedules from behind a desk instead of swinging hammers. Sophia had been promoted to assistant manager at her store. They were saving money again, looking at apartments they could afford to rent on their own, planning for a future that had seemed impossible a year ago. Sophia met Jack for coffee one morning in late March, her hands wrapped around her mug like she was holding something precious. You saved our lives. You know that, right? You saved our lives. You saved yourselves. I just gave you tools to work with. Sophia's eyes filled. But nobody else gave us tools. Everybody else gave us forms to fill out and reasons we didn't qualify. You gave us hope, and hope is worth more than money. That moment, sitting in a small coffee shop on a Tuesday morning with a woman who'd found her way back from the edge, was worth more to Jack than the entire vault of gold and silver and art locked in the mountain. December arrived with fresh snow and the kind of crisp cold that made everything feel clean. 1 year and 1 week after Jack had stood in freezing weather with a frozen key, staring at a concrete tomb that became a home. 1 year since Sophie had asked if it was going to be scary. Christmas morning, they woke in their actual house, the 3-bedroom ranch with heat that worked and water that flowed, and a kitchen table where they ate breakfast together. Sophie opened presents that were meaningful rather than expensive. Books she'd been wanting, a telescope for looking at stars, a bicycle for riding to school instead of waiting for rides. Jack opened the gifts Sophie had made, a photo album she'd assembled from pictures taken over the past year. The first page showed the Civic parked at Walmart, taken from inside, their life reduced to what fit in a car. The last page showed Morrison Automotive with Ray and 3 other apprentices standing in front, all of them smiling, all of them transformed. In between were photos of Winter Vault being restored, of the vault being cataloged, of the courthouse steps after the trial, of families moving into apartments, of Sophie in her new bedroom. A year documented in images. The inscription Sophie had written in careful letters on the first page. From scared to safe, from lost to found, from alone to family. I love you, Dad. Love you. Jack couldn't speak, just held his daughter and let tears come because sometimes you earn the right to cry. In the afternoon, they drove to the Whitfield Foundation office, the nonprofit Jack had established to coordinate all the work. 100 people came to the community meal they had organized. Families the foundation had helped find housing. People who'd gone through the apprenticeship program. Volunteers who gave their time. Community members who'd watched transformation happen and wanted to be part of it. Ray was there with his son, the teenager he'd regained custody of, teaching the boy how to carve turkey like it was a skill worth passing down. The Rodriguez family arrived with homemade tamales, Sophia insisting on contributing something after everything they'd received. And in the corner, working meal service with quiet efficiency, was Derek Barrett. He'd shown up at Morrison Automotive 3 months after the trial, different man from the one in the expensive suit, wore worn jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. The cold confidence was gone, replaced by exhaustion and something that looked like shame. I need to apologize, he'd said. I was desperate when I came after you. My investments had failed. Bad decisions, worse timing. I was facing bankruptcy, losing my home. When I found out about Uncle William's vault, I saw it as my only way out. A lifeline I felt entitled to because we shared blood. He'd pulled out an envelope, $800. Everything he had left after losing everything. It's not enough to repay your legal fees. Not even close. But it's all I have. I wanted you to know I understand now. I understand what desperation feels like. What it means to lose everything. I'm sorry for what I tried to do to you. Jack had looked at the envelope. $800. The exact amount he'd had when he bought the bunker. The universe's sense of irony. Keep your money. But I can give you what I give everyone who comes through that door, a chance. He'd offered Derek a job, case manager at the Whitfield Foundation, $45,000 a year, health insurance, honest work helping people in crisis, work that required understanding what rock bottom looked like from personal experience. Derek had stared like Jack was speaking a foreign language. Why would you help me after what I tried to do? Because second chances aren't earned. They're given. William gave me one. I'm giving you one. What you do with it, whether you waste it or build something meaningful, that's entirely up to you. Now Derek worked the meal service, transformed from entitled antagonist into someone useful, and Jack watched him help a homeless family get plates and wondered if William Barrett was somewhere watching this and smiling at how his wealth was being used. The next morning came early. Jack was at Morrison Automotive by 0700, underneath a 1967 Mustang, hands already covered in grease, doing the work he loved. Ray walked in carrying coffee for both of them. Morning, boss. Got good news. 3 new clients this week from referrals, and Mrs. Henderson wants a full restoration on her husband's old pickup truck. That's excellent. You taking the restoration job? If you'll supervise. Still learning bodywork, don't want to mess up something that means that much to her. Of course I'll help. Bring it by tomorrow. Sophie was at the shop desk doing homework before school started, looked up from her math worksheet. Dad, can we get pizza tonight? Yeah, princess. Soon as I finish this carburetor. The phone rang. Monica from the foundation, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant someone needed help urgently. Jack, got a family that needs assistance. Young mother, 2 kids under 5, living in their car for the past 3 weeks. Situation sounds familiar. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, left dark smears on red fabric. Tell her I'll be there in an hour. He turned to Ray. Think you can finish this carburetor adjustment? You taught me well. I got this. Jack and Sophie walked out together into bright Colorado morning. Sunshine reflecting off snow that had fallen overnight. The Highlander started immediately, heat pouring from vents, so different from those months in the Civic when warmth was luxury they couldn't afford. They pulled out onto Main Street, heading toward Colorado Springs, toward the foundation office, toward another family that was right now sitting in a car somewhere, wondering if they'd ever be warm again, wondering if anyone cared, wondering if hope existed for people like them. Sophie buckled her seatbelt, looked at her father. Dad, that lady on the phone sounded scared, like we used to be. Yeah, princess. But she won't be scared for long. Jack accelerated smoothly, the Highlander handling icy roads with confidence the Civic never had. Behind them, Wintervault remained hidden in mountains, keeping its secrets, holding what remained of $300 million in wealth that would change more lives in years to come. Before them, the road stretched toward another second chance to give, another family to help, another life to transform. And Jack Morrison, who'd once stood in snow with nothing but a frozen key and desperate hope, now carried that hope forward to others every single day. Not because he'd found treasure in a mountain, but because he understood what William Barrett had been trying to say in that letter, written 1 week before death. Wealth only matters if it does something, if it creates something, if it helps someone. He'd been given a second chance when he had nothing left. Now he gave second chances to everyone who needed one. That was the work. That was what was real. That was the legacy William Barrett had trusted him to build. The road curved ahead through morning sunlight. Jack drove toward it without hesitation. Sophie beside him, another family waiting, another opportunity to prove that people were better than fear and isolation had let William Barrett believe. The vault had given Jack resources, but the real treasure wasn't gold or art or stock certificates. The real treasure was purpose, connection, the knowledge that his life mattered not for what he owned, but for what he built with it. And every morning he woke up and did the work, fixed cars, trained apprentices, helped families, one person at a time, one second chance at a time, building something that would outlast him, the way William's vault had outlasted William. That was the inheritance, that was the gift, not money, meaning. Jack Morrison had learned that lesson in the darkness of an underground facility bought for $750, and now he was teaching it to everyone who walked through his doors looking for hope. The work continued, the mission endured, and somewhere in the mountains, Winter Vault stood ready to fund that mission for generations to come, waiting patiently for the next person who needed what it could provide. But that was tomorrow's story. Today, Jack had a family to help, a daughter to protect, a life to live that was worthy of the trust placed in him by a dead billionaire who'd finally found, through Jack, the redemption he'd sought too late in his own life. The Highlander climbed the mountain road toward Colorado Springs. The radio played quietly. Sophie hummed along. And Jack Morrison smiled, knowing exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. He was a man who'd been given everything when he had nothing, and now he gave everything to people who had nothing. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. 3 years after Jack Morrison bought an abandoned bunker for $750, Winter Vault had become something its builder never imagined. Not a hiding place for wealth hoarded in fear, but a launching pad for lives already built from ruins. The facility itself remained largely unchanged, concrete and steel still holding their secrets 3 levels deep in the Colorado mountains. But the vault's contents had transformed into something William Barrett would have recognized as redemption. Jack stood in the director's office on level 1, the same room where he'd first found Barrett's maintenance logs and journal, and looked at the wall he'd converted into a mission board. Not the sleek digital displays of modern nonprofits, but old school, corkboard and push pins and index cards, each one representing a family helped, a business started, a life changed. 217 cards now. 217 stories that had started with someone desperate enough to ask for help and someone who'd been desperate enough himself to understand. The morning sun, what little reached this deep into the facility through the entrance 3 levels above, cast long shadows across the desk. Jack's desk now, though he still thought of it as Barrett's. He'd kept the leather chair, cracked and worn, because it reminded him that wealth without purpose was just numbers on paper. Barrett had sat in this chair for decades protecting his fortune. Jack sat in it, distributing that fortune to people who'd actually use it. His phone buzzed. Text from Monica at the foundation office in Clearwater. Sarah Chen's here. Says she needs to talk to you personally. Won't discuss it with anyone else. On my way. Jack grabbed his jacket, the same Carhartt he'd worn that first day in the snow, too sentimental to replace even though he could afford 1,000 new ones. Checked that the vault door on level 3 was sealed, more from habit than necessity. The vault held maybe $200 million now, down from $327 after 3 years of careful liquidation and strategic deployment. Still enough to fund the foundation's work for decades. Still more than any one person needed. The drive to Clearwater took 25 minutes in the Highlander, which Jack had kept despite Sophie's insistence that they could afford something nicer. The truck worked. It was reliable. That was enough. The mountain road was clear, late April sunshine melting what remained of winter snow, and Jack used the drive time to think about what Sarah Chen might need. He knew her story, knew everyone's story who came through the foundation. Sarah was 34, nurse at the hospital in Colorado Springs, single mother to twin boys age 6. Her husband had died 2 years ago, brain aneurysm at 36, no warning, just collapsed at work and never woke up. Life insurance paid the funeral costs with nothing left over. Sarah worked double shifts to keep the apartment and childcare and food on the table, but she was drowning slowly the way Jack had drowned before Wintervault threw him a lifeline. The foundation had helped 6 months ago, caught up her rent arrears, provided childcare assistance so she could drop to single shifts and actually see her kids, enrolled the twins in after-school programs. Sarah had been grateful, professional, and determined to stand on her own as soon as possible. So why was she here now, insisting on talking to Jack personally? Monica met him at the foundation office door. She's in conference room 2, won't tell me what it's about, just that it's important and she needs to talk to the Marine. Jack smiled slightly. Monica was ex-Army herself, a ROC veteran who understood the tribal language of military service. She'd started as foundation administrator a year ago and had become indispensable. Organized, efficient, and blessed with the ability to read people that came from seeing them at their worst. How does she seem? Scared. But not the kind of scared that comes from being in trouble. The kind that comes from being afraid to hope. Jack found Sarah in the small conference room, sitting with her hands folded on the table like she was at attention. She stood when he entered, nurse's scrub still on from her shift, tired eyes that had seen too much loss too young. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for seeing me. It's Jack, and you don't need to thank me for showing up." "What's going on, Sarah?" She sat back down, organized her thoughts the way medical professionals did. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Can you do that?" Jack sat across from her. "I'm listening." Sarah took a breath. "6 months ago, your foundation saved my life. Not dramatically, not from some immediate crisis, but from the slow death of working myself into the ground while my boys grew up without a mother who had energy to actually be present. You gave me breathing room, time, hope." Jack waited. "I used that time, got my finances organized, started therapy to process losing David, began actually parenting my sons instead of just surviving around them. And I started thinking about the future instead of just the next shift." She pulled papers from her purse. "I applied to a nurse practitioner program, advanced degree, 2 years, mostly online, but some in-person requirements. It would let me move from bedside nursing to primary care. Better hours, better pay, more time with my boys. A career instead of just a job." "That's excellent, Sarah. Congratulations." "I got accepted. Full admission to the program starting this fall. But there's a problem." She slid the papers across the table. "Tuition is $68,000 for the 2 years. I have $12,000 saved. I can get federal loans for maybe $30,000. That leaves me $26,000 short. I've applied to every scholarship I can find. Been denied from all of them. Too much income to qualify for need-based, not enough academic distinction for merit-based." She looked directly at Jack. "I'm here to ask for a loan. Not a grant, a loan. I'll pay back every cent with interest. I've worked out a payment plan." She showed him a spreadsheet, numbers and timelines calculated with precision. $500 a month for 5 years once I'm working as an NP and making better money. "I know the foundation doesn't typically do educational loans, but I'm asking you to make an exception. I'm a good risk. I'm motivated. I won't let you down." Jack looked at the spreadsheet, looked at Sarah's face, professional and proud and fighting to keep desperation hidden. Looked at the reality of a woman who'd been knocked down by tragedy and was trying to build something better instead of just surviving. "Why do you think I'd say no to a grant? Why assume it has to be a loan?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Because I'm not a charity case. I'm a working professional who hit a rough patch. The foundation helped me stabilize. I'm grateful for that. But I can pay my own way for this. I just need a bridge to get there." Jack recognized that pride. He'd had the same pride living in the Civic, refusing to panhandle even when hunger made his hands shake. Pride was what separated people who'd rebuild from people who'd stay broken. "Tell me about the program. What will you do with the degree?" Sarah's whole demeanor changed, became animated. "I want to work in underserved communities, places like Clearwater, rural areas where people can't access primary care easily. There's a shortage of providers in mountain towns. I could open a practice, maybe partner with the hospital in Colorado Springs for backup. provide care to people who currently drive 2 hours to see a doctor, especially maternal health, pediatrics, the things that matter most to families. She leaned forward. I grew up in a town like Clearwater, watched my mother drive 90 miles for prenatal care when she was pregnant with my sister, watched friends get sick from things that could have been prevented with regular checkups. I became a nurse because I wanted to help. This degree lets me help more effectively. How long have you been planning this? Since David died. She said it simply, matter of fact. I was angry for a long time, angry at the universe, at the randomness of an aneurysm taking a healthy 36-year-old man. Then I realized anger was just wasted energy. David would want me to build something. For our boys, for other families. He'd want his death to mean something. Jack understood that completely. Melissa, his wife, had died of cancer 3 years before the auction that changed everything. He'd carried the same anger until Sophie forced him to transform it into purpose. Here's what I'm going to do. Jack pulled the papers toward him. The foundation will provide a grant, not a loan, for your full tuition. $68,000. You'll sign a commitment agreement instead. 5 years after you graduate, you'll work in underserved communities. Doesn't have to be Clearwater specifically, but somewhere that needs you. You'll charge sliding scale fees, accepting Medicare and Medicaid patients that other practices turn away. And when you're established, when you're stable, you'll identify one other person like yourself. Someone working hard, trying to build something, just missing resources to get there. And you'll help them the way I'm helping you now. Sarah stared at him. That's not a loan. No, it's an investment in you, in the communities you'll serve, in the cycle of people helping people. I can't just take $68,000. Yes, you can. William Barrett left this money specifically for this purpose, to help people who'd use help to build something meaningful. You're exactly who he had in mind. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Because 3 years ago, I was living in a car with my 7-year-old daughter. We had $800 and nowhere to go. I took a desperate gamble on an abandoned bunker and found more than shelter. I found purpose, found a dead man's letter telling me to be braver than he was, kinder than he was, better than he was. This is me being better, Sarah. This is me passing on what was given to me. Sarah cried then, nurse's professional composure breaking under the weight of relief and gratitude, and the overwhelming reality that her plan could actually work. Jack waited, let her process, understood that sometimes the kindness of strangers was harder to accept than their indifference. When she'd composed herself, when she'd signed the commitment agreement and shaken his hand and left with $68,000 in educational funding, Monica appeared in the doorway. That was good work. That was easy work, Jack corrected. She'd already done the hard part. Planning, researching, getting accepted. She just needed someone to believe in her. That's what you do, though. You believe in people when they've stopped believing in themselves. Jack thought about William Barrett, alone in this facility for decades, maintaining systems for survival, but never really living. Someone needed to believe in him when he'd stopped believing in humanity. That someone wasn't there. So Barrett left his wealth to chance, hoping the universe would do what friends and family hadn't. I just follow instructions. Jack tapped the commitment agreement. One more card for the board. The foundation's work had evolved far beyond Jack's initial vision. What started as automotive training and transitional housing had grown into a comprehensive ecosystem of second chances. The apprenticeship program at Morrison Automotive had trained 43 people in 3 years. 38 of them were now employed in the industry. 5 had started their own businesses. The success rate was absurd compared to normal job training programs, but Jack understood why. People worked harder when someone believed they could succeed. The transitional housing program had expanded from 6 apartments to 4 buildings across 3 counties. 78 families had moved through the program, 61 of them now stable in permanent housing they could afford. The Rodriguez family, first residents of the original building, had bought their own house 6 months ago. Miguel managed logistics for a construction firm. Sophia was assistant regional manager for her retail chain. Their kids were thriving. Ray Torres had expanded his mobile repair service into 3 trucks and was training his own apprentices. He'd reconciled with his son, regained full custody, was dating someone seriously for the first time since his divorce. Last month, he'd paid off the loan for his original truck 2 years early and donated the equivalent amount to the foundation. I know what it's like to need help, his note had said. Now I know what it's like to give it. Turns out the second feels better. But the work that mattered most to Jack was the work nobody saw. The individual conversations in small conference rooms with people whose stories would never make newspapers or foundation newsletters. People like Sarah Chen, who just needed someone to believe their plan could work. Jack had learned something William Barrett never understood. Wealth wasn't the money. Wealth was the connection between people who helped each other climb out of holes. Wealth was watching Ray teach his son to diagnose engine problems the way Jack had taught Ray. Wealth was getting a Christmas card from the Rodriguez kids with their school pictures and straight-A report cards. Wealth was Sarah Chen in nurse practitioner school learning to serve communities that needed her. The money in Wintervault's vault was just the tool. The wealth was what you built with it. Sophie was 13 now, growing into a young woman who remembered sleeping in a car but didn't let that memory define her. She volunteered at the foundation office after school, filing paperwork and answering phones, and occasionally sitting across from families and listening to their stories with the kind of compassion that couldn't be taught. Jack picked her up at 4:30 like he did every day, found her an animated conversation with a mother of three who was applying for housing assistance. Sophie was explaining the application process, pointing out sections that needed attention, asking clarifying questions that would help the application get approved faster. When the woman left, Sophie gathered her homework and backpack. Dad, did you know she drives an hour each way to work at a chicken processing plant? 4 days a week, 10-hour shifts, and she still can't afford rent in Colorado Springs. That's insane. Jack agreed it was insane. Also agreed there wasn't an easy solution beyond helping one family at a time, which was what they were doing. They drove home to the house in Clearwater, the 3-bedroom ranch that still felt like luxury compared to the Civic's back seat. Sophie did homework at the kitchen table while Jack made dinner, spaghetti and salad, nothing fancy but together. This was the routine they'd built. School, work, foundation, dinner, homework, family time, normal life that had seemed impossible 3 years ago. After dinner, Sophie brought up the topic she'd been circling for weeks. Dad, I've been thinking about Wintervault. We still own it, right? Yeah, still ours. But we don't live there anymore. We haven't been there in months. What are we doing with it? Jack had been thinking about the same question. The facility was secure, systems maintained by quarterly visits to check the generator and water pumps. The vault remained sealed with most of Barrett's original collection still inside, liquidating only what the foundation needed. But Sophie was right. They weren't using the space. It was just sitting there, empty, waiting for a purpose. What do you think we should do with it? Sophie had clearly prepared for this question. I think we should turn it into something useful, like a training center or a retreat space for families. Somewhere people could go when they need time to heal or learn new skills. We've got all those bunk rooms, the industrial kitchen, the common areas. It's basically set up for group living. Jack listened, impressed by how his daughter thought. She'd inherited her mother's planning mind and something else, something that came from watching her father transform tragedy into purpose. That's an interesting idea. What kind of training are you thinking? Sophie pulled out a notebook. She'd been researching job skills workshops for people transitioning out of homelessness, financial literacy classes, mental health retreats for veterans with PTSD, maybe even a wilderness therapy program since we're surrounded by national forest. People could stay for a week or two, intensive support, then transition back to normal life with skills and stability. Where would they sleep while we're running programs? We could build cabins on the property. 40 acres is plenty of space. Keep Wintervault for common areas and training spaces. Build small cabins for privacy. Solar power, sustainable design. The whole thing could be off-grid. Jack smiled. When did you become an architect and program designer? When I realized we have resources to help people, but we're not using them all. Money in the vault doesn't help anyone, Dad. But turning Wintervault into a place where people can rebuild, that honors what Mr. Barrett wanted. He built it to survive the end of the world. Let's use it to help people survive their personal apocalypses. Jack looked at his 13-year-old daughter and saw the future of everything he'd built. Saw someone who understood that wealth was responsibility, not luxury. Who understood that having more meant helping more. Who'd grown up watching her father give away millions and understood that was the only thing worth doing with money. Let's talk to Monica and Tom. See if it's feasible. If we can make the numbers work and the logistics make sense, we'll do it. Sophie hugged him. Thanks, Dad. For what? For teaching me that money is just a tool and for showing me what to build with it. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Jack drove up to Winter Vault alone. He hadn't been there in almost 2 months, unusual for someone who'd once lived there full-time. But the facility didn't feel like home anymore. Home was the house in Clearwater, with Sophie and normal problems like homework and grocery shopping. Winter Vault felt like a monument, a reminder, a trust that he was still honoring but had outgrown living inside. He walked through the levels, checking systems out of habit. Generator purged smoothly, water pumps cycled normally, HVAC maintained perfect temperature. Barrett's engineering was still solid after 50 years. Built to last, built to survive. Jack descended to level 3, entered the code on the vault door. 071498. The date Barrett's mother died. The code that was love and grief transformed into 6 digits. The door opened with its familiar mechanical symphony. Inside, the remaining assets waited in climate-controlled silence. Maybe 50 million in coins and art and bonds. Maybe more depending on how markets had moved. Enough to fund the foundation's work for decades, even with aggressive expansion. Enough to turn Winter Vault into the training center Sophie envisioned it. Enough to help thousands more people who needed what Jack had needed 3 years ago. Nothing, my man. But it was still just stuff. Just gold and paper and certificates. The real treasure was what you did with it. Jack found Barrett's original letter, the one addressed to whoever finds this, and read it again by the vault's fluorescent light. He'd read it dozens of times, but it still hit different every time. Don't do what I did. Don't hoard this wealth out of fear. Use it. Build something with it. Help people with it. Be braver than I was. Kinder than I was. Better than I was. I'm trying, Jack thought. I'm trying to be better. He locked the vault and returned to level 1, to Barrett's old office, and sat in the cracked leather chair. Pulled out his phone and opened the photo album Sophie had made, the one documenting their transformation from homelessness to stability to purpose. The last photo was new, added just yesterday. Sarah Chen signing the commitment agreement, tears on her face, hope in her eyes. Sophie had taken the picture without anyone noticing, capturing the exact moment when possibility became real. Jack's phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Morrison, my name is Marcus Webb. I'm a Marine, 2 tours Iraq, homeless in Denver past 4 months. Someone told me you help veterans. I'm not looking for handouts, just work, just a chance. Can we talk? Jack read the message twice. Thought about another veteran, Ray Torres, who'd walked into Morrison Automotive 3 years ago with the same pride and desperation. Thought about how that chance had changed a life, created a business, reunited a family. He replied, 0800 tomorrow. Morrison Automotive, Clearwater, Colorado. Bring work boots in willingness to learn. That's all you need. The response came fast. Thank you, sir. I'll be there 0730. Jack smiled. Marines always showed up early. He turned off the lights in Barrett's office, secured the facility, and drove back to Clearwater under stars that looked the same as they had when he'd first arrived with Sophie 3 years ago, desperate and afraid and hoping that $750 hadn't bought them a grave. The stars hadn't changed, but everything else had. 1 year later, Winter Vault Training Center opened for its first session. 12 participants, all veterans, all struggling with transition to civilian life, all recommended by VA counselors who'd heard about the program through informal networks. 2 weeks of intensive workshops, job skills, financial literacy, mental health support, outdoor team-building exercises in the national forest that surrounded the property. Jack led the opening session in the common room on level 1, the same room where he'd spent his first night in the facility, and looked at faces that reminded him of his own reflection 4 years ago. Tired, wary, proud enough to show up but skeptical that anything would help. I'm not going to give you a motivational speech. Jack started, I'm not going to tell you it gets easier or that everything happens for a reason or any of that garbage that well-meaning people say when they don't understand. The veterans relaxed slightly, recognized someone speaking their language. What I am going to tell you is this. 4 years ago, I was living in a car with my daughter. Lost my job, lost my apartment, lost everything I thought defined me as a man. I was a Marine, a mechanic, a father, and I couldn't provide the most basic thing, shelter. He told them about the auction, the gamble, the first night in Winter Vault. Told them about finding the vault and the letter from a dead billionaire who'd made billions, but died alone regretting how he'd lived. That billionaire left me a choice. I could take his money and disappear, live comfortable and anonymous. Or I could use it the way he wished he'd used his, to help people, to build things that matter, to give second chances to people who deserve them. Jack gestured around the room. This facility exists because someone believed that second chances matter more than hoarding wealth. You're here because I believe the same thing. You've served your country. You've sacrificed things civilians will never understand. Now you're struggling with transition that nobody prepared you for. I can't fix that, but I can give you tools, skills, support, connection to people who understand. And when you leave here in 2 weeks, you'll have jobs waiting, real jobs with real pay and real opportunity to build something. He paused. All I ask in return is this. When you're stable, when you've rebuilt your life, you help someone else do the same. You pass it forward. That's how this works. That's how we honor the people who helped us. Marcus Webb, the Marine who texted a year ago, sat in the front row. He worked at Morrison Automotive now, senior mechanic, training his own apprentices. He'd volunteered to help with this program, to be visible proof that the system worked. After the orientation, Marcus pulled Jack aside. This is good work you're doing. These guys need this. We all needed it, Jack corrected. Still need it. The work never stops. What's next? After you have helped all these veterans? Jack thought about Sophie's expansion plans, about the cabins being built on Winter Vault's 40 acres, about the partnerships being formed with VA hospitals and homeless services and community colleges. Next is more. More training programs, more second chances, more proof that people matter more than profit. He looked at Marcus. You asked me a year ago for work, not handouts, remember? I remember. I'm asking you the same thing now. Don't just work for me. Work with me. Help me scale this thing. Help me build systems that survive after I'm gone. Be part of the leadership team that ensures Winter Vault keeps serving people for decades. Marcus understood what was being offered. Not just a job, a mission. What's the pay? Less than you'd make in private sector. More than you need to live well, with the satisfaction of knowing your work matters. Marcus extended his hand. Semper Fi, Jack, I'm in. They shook on it. Two Marines building something that would outlast them both, and Jack felt William Barrett's presence like a benediction. This was what the old man had wanted. Connection, purpose, legacy measured in lives changed rather than wealth accumulated. 5 years after buying Winter Vault for $750, Jack Morrison stood on the facility's property during the dedication ceremony for the completed training center. 100 people attended, foundation staff and board members, graduates of various programs, families who'd been helped, local officials who'd initially been suspicious, but now championed the work. Sophie, 16 now and frighteningly competent, managed the ceremony logistics with the ease of someone who'd grown up watching her father organize complex operations. She'd already been accepted early admission to 3 universities, all offering full scholarships. But she'd deferred to spend a gap year working at the foundation full-time. Wanted to understand the work from ground level before studying nonprofit management in college. Tom Russo, the lawyer who'd risked taking Jack's case on contingency 5 years ago, gave the keynote address. Talked about how a $750 auction purchase had become a $20 million foundation that had helped over 500 families. How one man's desperate gamble had become proof that the system could work when people prioritize humans over profits. Ray Torres spoke representing program graduates. Told his story of PTSD and unemployment and finding purpose through Morrison Automotive's apprenticeship. Told how learning to fix engines had taught him how to fix his life. Told how he now employed 7 people in his mobile repair business and was teaching his son the trade. Sarah Chen spoke representing educational grant recipients. She'd graduated from her nurse practitioner program 6 months ago and opened a clinic in a mountain town 2 hours from Clearwater. Served a community of 3,000 people who'd previously driven 90 miles for primary care. She announced that she'd identified her successor, the person she'd committed to helping. A young man from her town who wanted to become a physician assistant but couldn't afford the program. She was funding his education the way Jack had funded hers. Derek Barrett spoke representing Second Chances. He'd worked as foundation case manager for 4 years, helped hundreds of families. rebuilt his own life from bankruptcy to stability. He'd reconciled with his ex-wife, shared custody of his kids, found peace with his uncle's decision to disinherit him, spoke about how mercy was stronger than entitlement, how grace transformed what judgment couldn't touch. But Jack didn't speak. He'd asked not to be included in the program. This wasn't about him. This was about the work, about the people, about the cycle of helping that would continue long after everyone at the ceremony was gone. He stood in the back, watching, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Completion. Not the end of work, there was always more work, but completion of the promise he'd made, standing in this same facility 5 years ago with a sick daughter and nowhere else to turn. He'd promised to honor William Barrett's trust, to be braver, kinder, better than the man who died alone regretting his fear. He'd kept that promise. The proof was everywhere. In Ray's business, in Sarah's clinic, in Derek's redemption, in the 500 families who'd been given second chances and used them to build something meaningful. After the after the crowd dispersed and the cleanup began, Jack walked down to level 3 alone, entered the vault one final time with the code that meant love. Inside, the assets had dwindled to maybe 10 million, enough to keep the foundation running indefinitely with prudent management. The glass cases were mostly empty. The safety deposit boxes reduced from 412 to 23. Almost everything had been converted into programs and opportunities and second chances. William Barrett had started with 310 million and died with all of it, having helped no one. Jack Morrison had started with $750 and would die with nothing, having helped hundreds. That felt like the right trajectory. That felt like understanding what wealth actually meant. He found Barrett's letter one last time, the edges worn from handling, the words still clear. Prove that people are better than I believed they were. We did, Jack thought. We proved it 500 times over. He locked the vault, knowing it might be months before he returned. The training center would use the facility's common areas and bunk rooms, but the vault itself was just storage now. The real work happened in automotive shops and clinics and job sites and homes where people rebuilt their lives one day at a time. Jack climbed the stairs to level 1, emerged into sunshine that seemed brighter than it should after years underground, and found Sophie waiting by the Highlander. Ready to go home, Dad? Yeah, Princess, let's go home. They drove down the mountain in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from understanding each other completely. The training center disappeared behind them. Clear water appeared ahead, and between the two, the road where Jack had once driven in desperate hope with a daughter who'd asked if it was going to be scary. It had been scary. It had been terrifying. It had been the best thing that ever happened to them. Sophie broke the silence. Dad, I've been thinking about college, about what I want to study. Jack waited. I want to study systems, how to build organizations that survive their founders, how to create cycles of help that become self-sustaining. I want to learn how to scale what we've done here, take it national, help other communities build their own versions of the Whitfield Foundation. You want to build more winter vaults. I want to build 1,000 winter vaults, different models for different communities, but all based on the same idea, that people deserve second chances, that wealth is responsibility, that the measure of success isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away. Jack pulled into their driveway, turned off the engine, looked at his daughter who'd grown from a scared 7-year-old coughing in a car to a young woman ready to change the world. Your mother would be so proud of you. She'd be proud of you too, Dad. You took the worst thing that ever happened to us and turned it into the best thing. That's not luck. That's character. They went inside together to the modest house that was enough, to the normal life that felt extraordinary because they'd earned it by refusing to quit when quitting was the logical choice. That night, Jack sat in his workshop, the converted garage where he still fixed cars for neighbors because working with his hands kept him grounded. He was rebuilding a carburetor for Mrs. Henderson's husband's old truck, the restoration project that had become a 2-year labor of love. His hands moved through familiar motions, cleaning jets, adjusting floats, the mechanical meditation that never got old. His phone was full of messages. Congratulations on the training center opening. Thank you for changing my life. When's the next application period? Each message a reminder that the work mattered, that people noticed, that impact rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict. But the message that made Jack pause came from an email address he didn't recognize. The subject line was simple, from William's attorney. Jack opened it, curious. Mr. Morrison, my name is David Melbourne. I was William Barrett's attorney for 32 years. I'm writing now because a condition in a private codicil to his will has been met. William left instructions that if his winter vault facility was ever used for charitable purposes, serving more than 100 people within 5 years of his death, a final message should be delivered to whoever accomplished that feat. You've exceeded that threshold significantly. Attached is a video William recorded 3 weeks before he died. He asked that it only be viewed by someone who proved his faith in humanity was justified. I believe you've done that. Regards, David Melbourne. Jack downloaded the video file, sat in his workshop with grease on his hands, and wondered what a dead billionaire had left to say 5 years after the fact. He pressed play. The video showed William Barrett in what looked like a home office. Late 70s, gaunt from cancer, but eyes still sharp, still intelligent. He looked directly at the camera and spoke. If you're watching this, you've done something I never managed. You've used wealth to help people. Real people, not abstract causes or tax deductions, but actual human beings whose lives you've touched. I don't know who you are, don't know your name or your story or what led you to Wintervault, but I know you were desperate enough to buy an abandoned facility for almost nothing. Brave enough to explore it. Honest enough to use what you found according to my wishes. Thank you. William's voice cracked slightly. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you for being better than I was, for proving that people can choose connection over isolation, generosity over fear, purpose over accumulation. I spent 71 years building walls. Financial walls, emotional walls, physical walls 300 feet underground. I thought security came from having enough resources to survive anything alone. I was wrong. Security comes from connection, from being part of something larger than yourself, from building systems that help people instead of protecting them from people. You figured that out. You've built what I should have built. And I'm grateful, even from beyond death, that my wealth finally served the purpose it should have served all along. Keep going. Help more people. Build bigger systems. Create cycles of generosity that outlast us both. And when you're old and looking back, know that you lived better than I did. That you were braver, kinder, better. Thank you. The video ended. William Barrett frozen on screen, looking at Jack across 5 years and the gulf between death and life, between regret and redemption. Jack sat in his workshop, tears on his face that he didn't try to hide because nobody was there to see them anyway, and felt the weight of a dead man's gratitude settle around his shoulders like a blessing. We did it, he thought. We proved him right. We proved people are worth believing in. Outside, Clearwater settled into evening quiet. Lights came on in windows. Families sat down to dinner. Kids did homework. Adults worried about normal problems like bills and repairs and what to cook tomorrow. The daily machinery of ordinary life turning over like a well-maintained engine. And in a workshop on a residential street, a former Marine who'd bought a bunker for $750 sat with grease on his hands and a video from a ghost and knowledge that he'd honored a trust given by a stranger who died hoping someone like Jack existed. The work would continue. Sophie would scale it beyond what Jack could imagine. The foundation would help thousands more. Wintervault would train hundreds of veterans. The cycle would perpetuate because good systems, like good engineering, survive their builders. But tonight, in this moment, Jack Morrison allowed himself to feel what he'd earned through 4 years of grinding work and difficult choices and staying true to promises made to a dead man who trusted him. Peace, not the peace of having enough money, though the foundation was well funded. Not the peace of being respected, though his reputation had grown. Not the peace of accomplishment, though the work spoke for itself. The peace of knowing that his life mattered, that Sophie would carry on the mission, that William Barrett's wealth had finally found its purpose. That second chances worked when people believed in them hard enough to make them real. Jack Morrison turned off the video, finished cleaning the carburetor, and went inside to his daughter and his home and his ordinary life that was extraordinary only because he'd refused to let desperation become defeat. The vault in the mountain held its remaining secrets, waiting patiently for the next person who needed what it could provide. But the real treasure, the true wealth, walked on 2 legs and slept in bedrooms and worked in shops and clinics and offices across 3 counties. The real treasure was people given chances they'd earned by refusing to quit. That treasure would outlast gold and art and bearer bonds. That treasure was everything. And Jack Morrison, who'd started with nothing and gained everything that mattered, understood that better than most. The work continued. The legacy endured. And somewhere in the mountains, Wintervault stood ready for whatever came next, patient as stone, solid as the trust that had built it, waiting, ready, hopeful.